No i...
Hi, I'm Chris Wilson from Grinding Gear Games.
Cześć,
Thanks
Chris.
so much for joining us here today. And today is a day about Path of Exile. You're going to find out a lot of awesome stuff we've been working on. Before we get started though, I wanted to mention that there are Twitch drops that you can win. Below the live stream there are some instructions for signing up and linking your Twitch account with your Path of Exile account, and if you do that, you'll be eligible to receive the drops. So today's live stream has got 4 sections. They say you should start your show with a bang, so we're going to start right off with Path of Exile 2. After that, we're going to show you Path of Exile Ultimatum.
Paweł Wejder tu nabierze od razu.
Path of Exile that's coming out
Dzięki za
literally
follow,
next
Wingman.
week. After that, we're going to be joined by Ziggy D, who's going to host a Q&A where he asks me a whole bunch of questions from Twitch chat. So if you have any questions about the various reveals, make sure to keep them for the Q&A. Then there's going to be a live episode of the Bay Class podcast where Taki Cat and his crew of Path of
Kurwa, tu
Exile
powinien
veterans
być
are going to
Shapecast,
discuss
a
all
nie
the
jakiś
things we've
Backclass.
announced today.
Co to ma być?
They'll be joined by Rory Rackham, who's the Grinding Games
Polski
developer who's
Shapecast.
in charge of
Witam
the
Maxa
development of the
Jointer.
Ultimatum League.
Ponti.
All
Siema,
right,
Seren.
let's get started. You're probably wondering why has it been so long since we last showed you any Path of Exile 2 footage?
Przyciszcie tą
And
muzykę,
honestly,
bo
this is
głośno.
because the project is so important to us that we are definitely taking our time to make sure that we make the best possible action RPG. Let's watch a new trailer.
Patrzy prosto w oczy, trochę się dziwnie czuję. A, jest dobrze! Dobra, lecimy. Troszkę się spociłem, rów mi się trochę spocił.
Among ancient ruins, evil grows once more. The seed of corruption advances, spreading dread and despair. We must give chase.
O kurwa, kusza, widzieliście? Kusza! Dodadzą kuszę do gry. Więcej łuczników będzie. O kurwa, ale creepy.
These sands hide countless secrets.
Ale dojebana grafika.
3,000
No i
years.
ta gra wygląda jak ten.
levels.
O kurwa, ale creepy.
We must hunt
Co tu
down
się dzieje?
and put
Ale
an
dojebana
end to
muzyka w ogóle.
madness. If
Oh.
reclassed is to survive.
Ale hype. Ta muzyka buduje taki hype. Ale mi ciary przychodzą, kurwa, od tej muzyki. Łocie chuj. Ej, ale dojebane. Wiem, Dakerino, wiem. Ale czym się trzeba...
That trailer really shows what we have achieved with Path of Exile 2. I am so proud of the efforts of the entire team in putting that together. At ExileCon, we announced that Path of Exile 2 is a true sequel to Path of Exile. So that means a new 7-act campaign, it means a whole new skill gem system, new items, new monsters, character classes, all the Ascendancy classes are completely new, it's got
kurwa.
cutting-edge
O nie,
next-generation
mój
graphics
ranger.
as you just saw. Basically, it's everything you would expect from a sequel to Path of Exile. But we're not just throwing away our legacy,
Oh, łucznik
we're
podam
embracing it. Both campaigns will be fully playable from within the same game plan. You'll be able to play through the original Path of Exile storyline or the new Path of Exile 2 campaign on the way to the shared endgame. All of your old characters will still be playable, and of course any microtransaction purchases you've made in Path of Exile will carry on to the sequel. At ExileCon, we introduced the dark forests of the island of Ogum, where you start your journey. Today, we're proud to showcase Path of Exile 2's second act, which takes place in the Vastiri Desert. Welcome
Oh,
to Path of Exile
kurwa,
2's second
gameplay.
act. As you saw in the trailer, Act 2 is centered around a caravan of Maraketh called the Ardura who live in the Vastiri Desert. You're chasing another caravan from an opposing tribe called the Faradun. There's a set of large ancient gates blocking the progress of the caravan through a desert pass, so you're being sent through the Traitor's Passage to unlock them.
We shall wait here, Jingak. But the military carts have departed for the gates.
No i zajebiście to
Make haste.
wygląda.
Path of Exile 2 is a lot more than just new acts. We want combat to feel both brutal and responsive, even at low levels. We're ensuring that each weapon type has unique and different mechanics. Each weapon class feels different to play, and today we're going to start by demonstrating the new Spear
Jakie
weapon
dojebane
class.
pająki.
Spears are a weapon class favoring mobility with both
Teraz mówię o
melee and
Jira.
ranged attack options. To that end, each spear will grant you at least one mobility skill. In this case, the spear comes with both an engage and
Spear Magic
disengage
Find, ty.
When you engage, it increases your melee damage for a short time, and that really encourages you to be mobile during combat.
Poprawili tekstury, patrzcie się na tekstury, patrzcie się na
One of
napisy
the
tutaj.
skills we're using here is called
Bossów.
Whirling Slash. When you use Whirling Slash, it creates a sandstorm that grows in size each time you use the skill. When you leave the sandstorm, it explodes, dealing
Teraz-
damage to nearby monsters.
Teraz
A
łatwiej
great way to do
ten.
that is to use the
Wiecie
disengage
też
skill,
jakie
which makes
dziady
you
mają
fly
ten.
backwards and throw
Widzicie,
projectiles.
łatwiej to czytać. Speedy chyba jeszcze nie było, nie, to coś nowego jest. Cześć Galaxian, siema. Ale ładnie to wygląda, kurwa. Iluminacja.
In
Uśmiechnięta
PoE
usta.
2, each area's mini-boss is a much more substantial fight with interesting mechanics.
Tak.
You'll be able to find at least one mini-boss in each area of the game. One thing I love about this boss in particular is that it destroys the ceiling when it slams the ground, letting in more light. Clever players will notice that if they're standing in the light, then they're not going to have any rocks falling on their head.
No kurwa, 200 IQ, ale spoiler zrobił Chrisu.
The rapid assault skill that we're using against this boss does 3 rapid stabs, followed by a 4th stab that deals more damage and can stun if you're willing to commit to a long
Siemasz,
attack time. While developing the skills for Path of Exile 2, we were really thinking a lot about designing skills that could be cancelled early to dodge, or you can commit to the full attack for maximum damage.
Bij go tam kurwa na pyrę na raz, a nie tak się kitrasz dookoła, ej. Ale chujowy unit dostałeś, mordo. Dobra, dalej, let's go. Ktoś dostał deodrę, coś tam. Wale na pyrę, dokładnie. Patrz jakie zajebiste pająki. O. To jest buff do mojego
One of the
headhuntera.
skills we're using here is called Spear Field, which creates an area of spears coming out of the ground that impale monsters who walk into them, causing them to bleed. As the monsters move towards you, they take damage, so using your mobility skills as a way to move away
O
from
kurwa,
them is a
potył.
great strategy here.
Robi.
In Path of Exile 2, we've invested a lot in our animation system. I'm sure you're noticing the animations are looking a lot better than they did in PoE 1.
No,
But there's also a
wyglądają
lot of
lepiej.
subtle detail, like characters having different run animations depending on how fast they're moving. When we use a Quicksilver Flask here, you can see the character changes to a sprinting animation.
To faktycznie, no, mąka jest. Ooh, my...
Now that we've arrived at the Ancient Gates, we're going to show you another of the new weapon classes in Path of Exile 2, crossbows. Crossbows are special in that they grant attack skills implicitly. This particular crossbow grants Power Shot, which is a high damage single target attack. In order to modify what Power Shot does, you're going to need to equip Bolt skill gems, which change the type of bolts that are loaded into the crossbow. Here we've got 3 different bolt skills that the character can switch between depending on the situation.
Armor-piercing bolts. Incendiary
No,
bolts.
za szybkie to nie jest.
Permafrost bolts can be used to disrupt packs of enemies to prevent them from closing in on your position. You can then follow
O
up with
kurwa,
armor-piercing
glacial
bolts to do
cascade.
plenty of damage.
Glacial Cascade Bolt.
Outsider, join me in battle!
In this area, we're helping Asala, leader of the Ardura, to open the ancient gates and let the caravan through.
Armor-piercing bolts.
Ale powiem wam, że kampania wygląda obiecująco. Kurwa, to jest jakaś fabuła taka konkretna.
Because the bolt types are the skill gems, support gems that are added to them will modify whatever the skill is that you're using. Here we're going to add multiple projectiles to our incendiary bolt.
Permafrost bolts.
Continue the assault!
Incendiary bolts.
Slay them all!
Greater GMP? Lester, LMP. Ale na kurwa.
Permafrost bolts. Armor-piercing bolts.
Jak małe dziecko. Gość precision nie włączył, ej. Gość jedyną aurę ma w buildzie i nie włączył.
Incendiary bolts. Armor-piercing bolts. Permafrost bolts. Incendiary bolts.
In Path Path of Exile 2, we're doing a lot more interesting things with monster packs. Here you can see some of the monsters patrolling around.
Piercing bolts.
Uważaj! O kurwa! Ale creepy. Grafika wygląda spoko, no. Przy juicowaniu map to wydupcy mi komputer, no dam.
Incendiary bolts.
Ale ładnie to wygląda, nie mówcie, że nie.
Armor piercing bolts.
Zajebiste jest to, że jak twoja postać ma inną animację biegania w zależności od tego, jak szybko biegasz. Jak używasz Quicksilver Flaska, to nagle przyspiesza i widać, jakby sprintowała. Pojebana rozkmina w ogóle. To zamrożenie jest spoko. No to zamrożenie wygląda trochę jak Glacial Cascade, nie?
Permafrost bolts. Incendiary bolts.
No może, mam nadzieję, robię, mam nadzieję. Właśnie głośno to jest, nie? Głośno to jest?
Armor piercing bolts.
Trochę jak inna gra wygląda, bo to jest Path of Exile 2. Tego nie będzie teraz w nowej lidze, ale to będzie kiedyś. Chuj wie kiedy, pewnie się dowiemy może. Albo będziemy mieli
Now
hinta.
we're coming to another example of a Path of Exile 2 mini-boss, Liam the Impaler.
A spoilerują bossy, kurwa. Nie wiem, czy ja chcę to oglądać.
Incendiary bolts. Armor
Co
piercing.
ty się Jani Pawla? Mamy...
Boss has dropped another type of crossbow, a siege crossbow. This crossbow grants the siege cascade skill. The skill is also modified depending on what type
Dzięki
of
za
bolts you're
suba,
using.
Matel. Witam. To jest Path of Exile 2, które będzie dopiero kiedyś tam. To jest taki... To są raczej mini-bossy. No wiem, to są takie mini-bossy, które mówiły, że właśnie będą... Dawno mi to nie było. No ale wróciłeś.
Incendiary bolts.
O kurwa, na poziomie drugim suba dałeś. Ło, dzięki mordo. Dang. Thank you very much. Doceniam. Witam. Idealnie wbiłeś, nie? Bo oglądamy sobie.
Incendiary bolts. Armor piercing.
Implicit skilla w kuszy, no.
Permafrost bolts.
O kurwa, patrzcie co tu się dzieje teraz. Teraz ta kusza powoduje, że on nie strzela
We
już
try to add a lot more little details to combat in Path of Exile 2. You might notice that the monsters who die while burning have charred corpses. We really want to make sure that there's a feeling that as you leave the battlefield, there's clear evidence of what combat took
Miałem to
place there.
powiedzieć, no.
Permafrost bolts. Armor piercing bolts. Permafrost bolts.
Podoba mi się, że coraz więcej mobów tutaj jest.
Incendiary bolts.
A wiecie co jest najgorsze? Patrzcie się na jego pasek tutaj. QWE, widzicie? On tutaj zmienia.
Piercing bolts.
On tutaj zmienia zmienia skillę.
Permafrost bolts. Incendiary bolts. Armor piercing bolts.
On tutaj zmienia skillę między jednym a drugim. Mi się to wydaje...
Incendiary bolts.
No, to się to zależy co tam. No zajebiście to wygląda, tak, to jest... Kurwa mać. Dawać mi to. Take my money.
Incendiary bolts.
Dawać mi to dokładnie. Buźka z drgającym okiem.
Incendiary bolts. Permafrost bolts.
Fate Guard Wing 40% z 30 minut. Z 13 minut. Minęło 13 minut. Nie 30. Więc o wpół do dostaniecie skrzydła wszyscy, jak ktoś siedzi od początku tutaj ze mną. Bo ogólnie oglądał od początku.
Armor piercing bolts.
To na czacie wyskoczy na pewno.
This is the perennial king, the leader of the Faradon. His goal here is to prevent you from catching the caravan at any cost.
Kurwa, patrzcie jaki zajebisty pasek życia bossa. Widać to? Widzicie, nie? Ja dupce. To wygląda jak boss teraz. Patrzcie jaki duży pasek. Resist lightning. A, czaję, dobra. Ja tego nie mam, bo ja nie jestem na streamie. Ja nie oglądam. Co trzeba zrobić, żeby dostać skrzydła? Musisz mieć połączone konto Path of Exile z Twitchem. Wejdź sobie na swoje konto Path of Exile i w ustawieniach to masz. Dodaj tam konto Twitch i potem oglądaj przez 30 minut. Ale nuta, kurwa.
Make haste! He
Ale
must
Esa.
not escape.
Patrzcie się, to wygląda jak pustynia, kurwa, a nie jak duns jakieś, nie? To wygląda jak pustynia, a duns na przykład. Widzieliście w ogóle animację tego typu jak przybieg? Jaka zajebiście? To nie było takie drewniane. Tylko gość sobie przybiegł na lajcie, zatrzymał się. Fajnie to wyglądało.
You plan to continue your pursuit, yes? You will not catch him. Not without me.
We cannot follow through the raging sands. Let us return to the caravan and question this defector.
This is the Ardura caravan, your town in Act 2.
Wyobraźcie sobie nowe hideouty z fabuły, no ja dupca.
I am Asala, the Sekima of the Ardura. I care not where you came from, nor what caste you might have been there. All that matters is that you have shown yourself
Pokażesz?
capable and
Weź sobie
passionate
Nifty,
enough.
wciśnij na swoje konto i tam gdzie masz ustawienia bezpieczeństwa i takie pierdoły będziesz miał Manage Connections. Kliknij to i tam będziesz musiał połączyć konto Twitch. Jak coś.
From what your shade has told us, the situation is dire. This Balbalic.
Ten jadący hideout będzie pok? O kurwa, tutaj hideout? W tym? Karawanie?
Ask her
Wow!
what questions you will. Then we, Ardura, will decide her fate.
Chorobę lokomocyjną w tym mieście.
You need not trust me.
Ej, plotki głoszą, że ktoś kiedyś słucha tych wszystkich dialogów do końca. Są ludzie, którzy podobno to zrobili. Ja przeszedłem akty chyba z 1000 razy i nie wiem co się dzieje tam.
One of
chyba
the
w ogóle.
things we really wanted to do in Act 2 was to use the mobility of the caravan to allow the player to choose how they explore the act. Here you're given 4 options on how to proceed.
Tu można sobie wybrać w jakąś stronę kampanii chce się iść. I 4, jak ktoś nie ogarnął, to 4 do wyboru były różne ścieżki posunięcia kariery swojej do przodu. Właściwe zasłuchanie dialogów, no po kolei. Ale to jest męczące strasznie. Nie, po polsku to nie. Kurwa, jebać to. Po polsku to była tragedia.
Though events demand you tread upon a valley of the dead, do not do so flagrantly.
Wiecie, mi się podoba w ogóle. Wiecie, co mi się podoba tutaj? Taka, nie wiem jak to powiedzieć, taka egipska, taka starożytny
Once you
Egipt.
pick your destination, the caravan will travel to that area and come to a stop so that you can disembark and go on your quest.
Kurwa. Ty, karawana to jest nasz transport. Wybieramy questy, gdzie karawana ma dojechać i wtedy robimy dalej kampanię i możemy robić to po kolei
Because
jak
we
chcemy.
just got the Storm Spear skill as a quest reward, now would be a great time to switch back to spears and use some ranged abilities.
Patrzcie się jak te itemy też wyglądają.
Storm Spear fires a lightning projectile which splits on contact.
O kurwa!
The other skill we're using
Jaka
here is called
zajebista
Blazing
animacja.
Lance.
Siema
Blazing
Przemo.
Lance creates a trail of fire from the ground, dealing damage over time. However, if you're willing to stand in place for long enough, you can
Jak to
throw
się
a
roz-
second spear that will fan the flames for much more damage.
Jak to się zajebiście rozchodzi. Patrz jak to się robi. O. Pyk. Ale animacje. O!
We've just found a unique spear. It's called Devata's Wind. This spear has an extra modifier that
Potem to
synergizes really
przeczytamy.
well with Storm Spear.
Bo to
When
będzie
you
pewnie później.
disengage, you get 2 additional projectiles on your projectile skills.
Ale mnie ciary przechodzą, ja dupce. Dlaczego kurency znika? Nie wiem, to nie wiadomo. To jest tylko, wiesz, poglądowo, to nie wiadomo jak to będzie jeszcze. Jakieś kolce w ogóle. Nie, to będzie to będziesz mógł przechodzić Path of Exile albo pierwszą kampanię, albo drugą. Będziesz prawdopodobnie miał do wyboru przechodzenie nowej kampanii, albo będziesz mógł przechodzić starą. Oczywiście na nowym silniku, w sensie, nie? Tak graficznym. Wszystko. Na przykład teraz w PoE już mamy... W PoE w ogóle w pierwszym akcie w mieście mamy już grafikę z PoE 2, nie wiem czy zauważyliście. Oni to chyba dodali ligę temu, czy tam kiedyś. Już w pierwszym akcie w PoE, teraz mamy... To miasto całe w pierwszym akcie już jest PoE 2. Jaki fajny Jaszu. Mówił wcześniej, że będziecie mogli grać wszystkimi postaciami, które już mieliście, wszystko będzie grywalne, nie? Ale ZDPS ma chłop? Chłop ma jedną aurę i jej nie włączył, patrz. Ktoś tu ma precision. Ktoś tu ma precision i jej nie włączył. Tym względem. Wiesz kiedy już... Tak, 16. Za 8 dni. Dokładnie za 7 dni. I tam za 8. W piątek za tydzień, o. Klimat mroczny, pod. Patrz jak zajebiście to wygląda. Jak cię będę oglądać, dostaniesz skrzydła? Dostaniesz. Co ma być? Nowa liga będzie. Jeszcze jej nie zapowiedzieli tutaj. Na razie oglądamy to, co zrobili w Path of Exile 2. A zaraz będziemy mieli pewnie zapowiedź nowej ligi. Jeżeli dobrze zrozumiałem. O kurwa. Uber boss tu jest, tak jak Uber Elder, 2 naraz. Śmiesznie by było, jakby się wyjebał. Nie no, on nie gra na żywo, ale... Skrzynki z lutem? Nie ma skrzynek z lutem. Dostaniesz skrzydła po prostu. Jaki pogers w ogóle. Co jest kurwa? Mordo. Nie no, najlepszymi testerami gier są gracze jednak, ale zajebista ta walka jest, ja już nie gram Magic Findem, od dzisiaj będę zabijał bossy tylko. Nie ma szans. Czemu nie ma skrzynek tutaj Strongboxu? No bo tu jest okrojone jeszcze. Bo to jest tylko... Tu nie mam pewnie dodanych tych wszystkich future'ów, które są normalnie, czyli pozostały plik. To jest drugi akt. Tutaj po prostu mogą być niewgrane takie rzeczy jeszcze. Oni to potem wszystko
If you
dorzucą.
have any questions about what you just saw, we'll be doing a Q&A later on. While Path of Exile 2 definitely won't be released this year, we do have a Path of Exile expansion you can play 1 week from now.
Nie będzie Path of
I'd like to
Exile w tym
introduce
roku.
Path of Exile Ultimatum.
Nie będzie tutaj. Nie będzie, w tym roku nie będzie PoE 2.
Once, Exile.
O! Liga. Liga.
Choice.
Kurwa, moby na mapie. Nie no, GG. Yeah boy! Patrzcie się, moby na mapie. Ile mobów! O, mój zajeb...
Simple ultimatum. Leave with your life and a meager reward
Gość ma chaosorba na ryju, ty.
for a chance at ungodly riches.
Nie no, kurwa, chaosorby ożyły.
Trial you accept, the challenge grows.
Co tu się dzieje?
But fail and leave with nothing.
Porównajcie sobie grafikę, co to widzieliście przed chwilą i teraz, co to jest teraz, nie? To od razu widać różnicę. O, mój łuk.
Reap the reward you deserve.
8 nowych gemów. Vendor recipe nowe. Nowy coś w labiryncie. Nie, reworkowane. Mody, kataklizmy, abyss, żewele. esencje. Wszystko zdeworkowane. Co tu się dzieje? Betrayal, Blight, Breach, Perandus, Incursion, Delph, Atlas, Beastice, Boss, Nazi, Incubators, Bestiary, and much more.
Ultimate reward requires ultimate risk. Face the ultimatum.
O kurwa, ile reworków będzie? Co tu się dzieje? Co tu się dzieje? Dawaj, Chris. O kurwa.
When some people think of the Val civilization, they think of blood sacrifices, or Queen Atziri, or lost temples in the jungle. But I think of risking your items. From Val orbs through double corruption, the whole Val or no balls meme, we had to make sure that this expansion was about the concept of risking your items to get great reward.
Zjem się, sorry, Chris.
In each area of the Ultimatum League, you'll meet the Trial Master, an emissary of a Val entity only known as Chaos. On behalf of Chaos, the Trial Master enacts trials where exiles must risk an escalating set of valuable rewards as they attempt to overcome progressively more difficult encounters.
Mówiłem, że to chaos.
In each trial, you'll be presented with a reward, an objective, and a selection of difficulty modifiers that make the trial harder. Once you've chosen one of the modifiers, you must then complete that objective under the constraints of that modifier in order to win the promised reward.
Można sobie wybrać rodzaj walki, którą chcecie tu zrobić.
If you succeed in the challenge, the Trial Master will present you with an ultimatum. Either walk away with what you have earned so far, or risk it all to try to win additional rewards. He'll offer you another item if you can select an additional difficulty modifier and complete the challenge with both modifiers present. If you fail though, you'll lose both rewards and walk away with nothing.
Można wygrać nagrodę albo brać
If you
moc.
succeed, you'll be offered an additional reward in exchange for adding yet another difficulty modifier that stacks on top of the current ones. This cycle continues until the rewards become increasingly valuable and the encounter extremely
O
difficult.
kurwa, ale
You'll have to
dżusowanie.
pick a point to end your run and claim your spoils before you make the encounter too hard and lose everything.
Można dodupcać te
At its
rytuały.
longest, an ultimatum in endgame maps can sometimes have up to 10 fast trials in a row, with a special surprise in the last one.
Ale mobów na mapie.
In maps, you'll occasionally find items called inscribed ultimatums. These items can be placed in the map device to transport you to the Trial Master's domain. Each inscribed ultimatum specifies an offering that you must bring with you, a reward you can earn, and an assortment of ultimatum difficulty modifiers.
Podwój
If you're able to
egzalty?
complete the trial master will reward you with a specified reward, which is usually worth around twice the value of the item you must bring. For example, you may be asked to risk an exalted orb to win a stack of 2, or potentially risk a stack of 5 to win a stack of 10.
Ja pierdolę.
Naturally, inscribed
Headhunter
ultimatums can be traded with
400
other
000
players,
eksów.
so if you don't feel capable of completing a difficult challenge, you may be able to trade it away for a portion of the difference in price
Tylko, że tu
between
są-
the reward and the item
Tu
that
są
must be risked.
różne nagrody.
Likewise, if you have a powerful character, you may be able to selectively trade for profitable ultimatums to
Void
run.
baterii, ty.
There are also new unique items that can only be obtained from Ultimatum. One such unique is the Glimpse of Chaos Val Mask, which provides powerful benefits to your maximum life, mana, and energy shield at the cost of having severely reduced elemental resistances and no chaos resistance. The item can be corrupted multiple times and has unique corruption outcomes, such as removing a random modifier or transforming it into a different random corrupted unique helmet entirely that retains its corruption implicit mod. Another new Val unique item in Ultimatum is Mahuzottl's Machination, which grants you 6 keystone passives at once. Combining all of these keystones
O
results in some very
kurwa!
unusual outcomes.
Tarcza,
and the
która
item
daje
features an
6
entirely new
keystonów
unique
z
keystone as
drzewka.
well. We have worked hard to make sure that Ultimatum doesn't punish you for being in a party with other players. Party members compete in trials together, but have separate rewards available to them that will need to be locked in to begin the trial. Each player votes on which difficulty modifiers to select.
Ale ja nie gram w
As the
party, to
drawer
wyjebane.
invokes, the
Dawaj, dalej.
modifier will be chosen at random. If one player wants to take their reward and opt out of the next difficult trial, they're able to do so without stopping the other party members from continuing.
Oczywiście ten drugi zawsze gra
Rewards are
cyklonem.
dropped allocated to the players who earned them. So that's Path of Exile Ultimatum. I can tell you, on
Nice,
release
to
day, a
jebane to
lot of
jest.
our developers are looking forward to watching Twitch so we can see players risking far too much in order to try to get good rewards. Speaking of rewards, there's a lot to talk about here. We had a look at Path of Exile's past reward systems, and we honestly feel many of them are out of date, Many of them kind of lack identity, and to top it all off, like the core drop pool of just items that drop when you kill regular monsters just wasn't really compelling enough.
Dokładnie,
Like, you know
kurwa.
that feeling where any monster could drop a mirror?
No.
We want that for a whole slew of different items. And so we've made a lot of changes to Path of
Wiem,
Exile's
jak to jest, jak
rewards
biały
system.
mob
There's a
dropi
bunch of
mirror,
monsters. The core
żebyś
drop pool
wiedział,
keep it really
Chrisu.
interesting. There's ones to basically every piece of League and expansion specific content, and we're going to go through all of those for quite a while now. And I should mention that every change we're about to discuss not only affects the Ultimatum League, but also Standard League too.
Dawaj Headhuntera.
We started by reviewing which items can drop from monsters and chests in the core game. To make sure the core drop pool remains compelling, we've made various changes. You can now find 2 additional currency items as core drops, Orbs of Binding from the Harbinger League, and the new Veiled Chaos Orb, which we'll reveal in more detail soon. We've also added
kurwa,
5
zajebiste.
new Atlas base types, like this Energy Shield Recharge Amulet. These drop in specific regions of the Atlas of Worlds and have some powerful new implicit buffs.
Amulet Chaos Damage Implicit.
Another topic related to the core drop pool is that of boss runs. Veteran community members will remember when people used to do Val Oversoul or Dominus runs over and over because they were a profitable use of time. Final act bosses now drop more and better items, giving you a much more satisfying close to a difficult act and a more item-focused approach to getting ready for maps if you prefer. We have also added a bunch of very powerful and valuable League-specific uniques into the core drop pool. This means that they can drop from any sufficiently high-level monster without you having to engage with specialized content. Examples of these are Badge of the Brotherhood, Asylum, Pledge of Hands, Maloney's Mechanism, Brutus's Lead Sprinkler, and Headhunter. The goal of all
Spierdalaj.
these changes is to make sure that every monster you kill in Path of Exile has a chance to drop something incredibly valuable, regardless of what content you're playing. On top of all of that, we have added a handful of new vendor recipes, which let you make some pretty cool stuff. We really miss the days when players were scrambling to try to find unknown recipes, and so we're looking forward to seeing how long it takes for you to discover how these
Siema,
ones
Kalpa.
work. We have
I co-
also introduced a new type of reliquary key into the core
Ej,
drop pool for
nie
this
słyszałem, co
expansion.
mówił o
If you're
Headhunterze.
very lucky, you can find a Val reliquary key from any monster or chest in Path of
Nie
Exile.
trzeba mieć teraz Nemesis
When
na mapie, żeby
consumed in the
dropać
map
Headhuntera?
device, it gives you access to a vault with a chest that drops a special foil version of a Val-themed unique item. Each
te
unique
reliquary
has an
key
equal
były
chance of
kiedyś.
dropping. Due to the value and power level of the items contained within, this is the rarest reliquary key ever added to Path of Exile. The rest of our reward changes relate to items that you can earn by playing past content like prior leagues and expansions. We have 2 goals here. The first is to add and improve items
Zajebiście.
so that all past content has a compelling set of rewards. The second goal is to make it so that the best way to get any reward is to play the content that is primarily associated with that type of reward. Path of Exile's first expansion, Sacrifice of the Val, introduced a new ultimate boss, Adzeri, Queen of the Val. This fight holds up pretty well these days, considering that it is 7 years old, but its rewards really needed a refresh. The Sacrificial Garb base type that drops from Adzeri has been significantly improved with the addition of an implicit mod that grants +1 to the level of all Val gems you have equipped.
Cześć Jaboj.
We have also added 2 new unique items.
No,
to
gratuluję
Adzeri's
wszystkim
drop
za
pool and 2
skrzydła.
more to
Należało
the
wam
Brad
się
series.
wszystkim.
One of which is the Adzeri's Rule Judgment Staff, which prevents you from being stunned or having your damage reflected.
Nice kwiatek.
It grants a skill that alternates between Flames of Judgment and Storm of Judgment when used, as if you absorb the powers of Adzeri herself.
Co tu się kurwa dzieje, ty?
Skipping forward to 2016's release of Ascendancy, we have made some changes to how you receive your Labyrinth enchantments. Previously, when you completed the Labyrinth and went to enchant an item, you couldn't see what random result you'd get. Now, the result for each type of enchantment is shown to you in advance so you can make the right choice. In the Eternal Labyrinth, you're now offered 3 different helmet enchantments to pick between, in addition to the boots and gloves. This will make it a lot easier to find enchantments relevant to the skills you're using and to apply them to appropriate items.
Wybieranie enchantu, ale rip
In
labranerzy.
3.14, we're going to stop giving out unique jewels for each day's fastest labyrinth runs. And we've added these jewels as very rare drops that you might find in the labyrinth's final
Ale
reward
riperino.
chests.
To set.
Another highly requested labyrinth-related improvement is that you can now consume an offering to the goddess in the map device to open portals directly to a random trial. This greatly accelerates the speed at which you can find your final
O
trials.
kurwa, popłakałem się. Jedni
We've also
labranerzy.
added 2 new labyrinth-specific unique items, including the Scales of Justice unique
Idealna
shield,
zmiana dla
which
takich
rewards building your
bobów
character
jak
with a
Joy, wtedy
careful
robi
balance of
labras.
life and mana. If used correctly, you'll be granted protection from shock and ignite, as well as additional fire damage.
I te itemy sobie
Federa
pogarniamy
Parandus
później.
now has a much larger selection of unique item rewards. We have also rebalanced all sources of Parandus coins so that Parandus content is still the best place to get them from. A craft introduced in Harvest kinda destroyed the Parandus coin economy, so we're absolutely fixing that at the same time.
Gdzie te konie?
Essences have been numerically rebalanced and are in general stronger than they were before. Screaming essences can now be used to reroll rare items, in addition to their capability to upgrade items to rare. The 4 corrupted essences have had some of their less useful outcomes improved or replaced. Now, the only way to get the powerful upgrade-only top-tier essences is through remnants of corruption, which come from essence content.
O kurwa.
Blessings, the currency used to upgrade breach uniques, can now be used to upgrade breach stones between tiers also.
O kurwa!
Abyss jewels have been rebalanced and are on
Ale to
average
będzie
more
drogie.
powerful than they were before. We have also buffed Abyss chests to make sure that they are the best place to get Abyss jewels. We have also introduced Abyss Scarabs and have added 4 new Abyss-specific unique jewels, such as Tekrod's Gaze, a murderous eye jewel that increases your main hand critical strike chance and your offhand critical strike multiplier based on how many murderous eye jewels
Abyss
you have
Jewele.
equipped.
Wy sobie jaja robicie chyba.
Another example is the Ulaman's Gaze Searching Eye Jewel, which counts how many Searching Eye Jewels you have equipped and grants your projectiles a chance to be able to chain when colliding with terrain, proportional to this
O
number.
kurwa, to
These
będzie
unique jewels
coś...
have a chance to drop from any of the unique encounters at the end of the Abyssal Depths, and these encounters are now by far the most reliable way to obtain a
Searching
Stitch and
Eye
Vice
Jewel Stacking Magic Find Dead
We
Eye.
have added a handful of new beastcrafts, such as add a mod to a map or add a mod to an influenced item, which consume existing beasts. There are some other aspects of beast crafting that we've been keeping our eye on for a while, and we're taking this opportunity to rework them,
Można
so that
crafcić
high-level
mapy.
gameplay is less reliant on obtaining certain beastcrafts.
Czy coś.
Now, when you use the splitting beastcraft recipe on an item, both copies are marked as split, which prevents them from being split again. You cannot imprint split items. One of my favorite reward changes in this expansion is that Incursion's Temple of Atsuato can now be
Nie da się
itemized.
splitować
Once you
więcej
have
niż
access to the map
raz.
device, Alva can
GG.
turn your completed and ready to run temple into a tradable
Ale
object
to-
that can be consumed in the map device. This means that players can specialize in either making temples to trade to other players or trading for temples that are ready for them to run.
RIP,
There have also been a
crafterzy.
lot of changes to the temple. As you may know, specific rooms in the Temple of Atsuado can drop unique incursion items that can be later upgraded. Many of these base unique items have been improved in this update. Previously, the temple's boss, the Omnitect, dropped random rare items with special
Tempy
incursion
można
mods on
kupić,
them.
no.
Now it also drops rare items with incursion mods based around the themes of the rooms your temple contains. Higher tier rooms cause more rare items. Specific rooms now add specific monster packs to the temple, which results in more monster density, challenge, and reward. Temple mods have been buffed so
Siema,
that if
Lukasz.
your temple has more high tier rooms, then it's equivalent to a good map.
Co to za skill jest w ogóle, ty?
We have performed a modernization pass on rewards from temple rooms so that they're competitive with rewards from newer leagues. The explosive room also contains some basic chests that can be opened with flash powder kegs if you don't need them for opening a path elsewhere in the temple.
No jebany Empower dropnący za fart.
Delve has had a big increase to early rewards and a reduction to the quantity of high tier rewards spawning at very deep depths. The end result is that Delve is a lot more rewarding for almost everyone, but a few extreme players who delve very deep will not be getting quite so rich from it.
O, RIP
A
Delverzy.
big problem with rewards and betrayal is that players deem it not
O
worthwhile to kill
kurwa,
Katarina
RIP
because it
Delvezy.
resets your betrayal syndicate
Nie,
board.
żartuję.
In this expansion, we have massively increased the incentive for doing this. Now if you manage to kill Katarina, all syndicate members drop their rewards at 1 tier higher than they previously would.
No co ty pierdolisz?
This change required the introduction of a new 4th tier of reward from each syndicate member and encourages the use of a larger variety of syndicate targets and safe house leaders.
Kurwa, to
We have
będzie...
improved rewards that were not as interesting or valuable as the best ones. For cases where we deemed rewards too powerful, we moved them to tier 4 rather than nerfing them. The tier 4 rewards are approximately twice as powerful as tier 3 ones were. We have also added a new unique item to Katarina's drop pool as further incentive for
Gdzie masz
killing her.
filter, kurde?
The Cane of Kulamak drops only from Katarina. Similar to Paradoxica, it has 3 veiled modifiers that must be unveiled one at a time via Jun. This
Increase
means that each version of the
unveiled
cane could be
modifiers
entirely different,
magnitudes.
and because of the way
What
the
the...
veiled modifier system works, you have the chance to get 3 mods that potentially synergize extremely well, or maybe just a crazy bag of mods that don't work together. Furthermore, the cane itself scales up the magnitudes of any unveiled modifiers on it.
Nice, gratulacje tam.
We have made
Dobrze,
some
Winksy.
changes to how unveiling mods works. You still get offered a choice of 3 mods, but these are now more powerful versions of the existing ones. The powerful ones are unveiled onto items, and the normal versions are the ones you unlock that can be crafted onto items. Also, progress towards unlocking crafting of veiled mods is at a
O
slightly
kurwa,
faster
czyli
rate
te
than before.
unveilowane
Some
mody
very
będą
powerful
mocniejsze niż
veiled
zwykłe.
modifiers are now only available at their original strength on the unveiled version of the modifier, and the crafted version of the modifier has been lowered in power. Earlier in the presentation, I alluded to the new Veiled Chaos Orb as an item that has been added to Path of Exile's core
Orb
drop.
of Veiled Chaos.
This new currency item rerolls the target item with new mods, like a regular Chaos Orb does, but one mod is guaranteed to be a Veiled mod. While it can drop from any monster or chest in the game, by far the most effective way of getting it is from Exiling in some Betrayal safe houses.
What the fuck?
We have introduced 3 new types of incubators, for Blight, Metamorph, and Delirium, and have modernized the rewards from the other incubators. The
Oh,
item yield from
zajebiście,
chests
więcej
and
jajek.
blighted maps is now affected by a portion of the map item's quantity, giving you a reason to roll your blighted maps if you can handle the additional challenge.
Holy fuck, man.
Anointments to blighted maps have been rebalanced and reworked so that each has its own purpose and with a consistent increase in reward as the oils get rarer. This is basically entirely buffs, because one big nerf we needed to do was already done last league.
Dokładnie.
You can now corrupt blighted maps. These can very rarely drop the new tainted oil, which allows you to apply anointments to corrupted items.
O kurwa, olej, który można dawać na skoruptowane itemy. Będzie można...
We have
Wreszcie...
also introduced blighted scarabs. We have added 2 new types of catalysts themed around speed and
Będzie można na
critical strikes,
talizmany
respectively.
nadupcać tym
These
orbem.
new catalysts are rarer than previous ones.
Ale tym...
As discussed in the recent development manifesto, the current 3.13 version of Harvest is too rewarding, so we're rebalancing its crafting and also increasing how often
Na
you'll
20
encounter
kwanta
portals to the
te
sacred
Great
grove.
Wolfy, faktycznie, ale
The current
poder.
version spams you with way too many crafts, so each seed has a chance to grant a craft now, reducing the overall number of crafts you can
A
perform
co oni
per
to
garden.
pokazują, jakiś
So you will
ten...
encounter the grove 60% more
To nie jest ta
than you
liga
did
co
before.
ten? W śmietniku?
Some of the most powerful crafting options have been removed or changed.
Wiesz,
The
to
heart
chyba...
of the grove encounter is now a map fragment that can randomly
chyba
drop from
usunęli.
tier 4 harvest bosses instead of rarely replacing the entire grove when it spawns. With the release of Ultimatum, Ritual will be added to the
Kurwa,
core game,
powiedzieli o
with
Harvestie
a chance
dosłownie
to occur
15
in each
sekund.
map you play. It has also been added to the Atlas passive skill tree system and is
Nawet
available
Abyss
as
miał
a
więcej
sexton
czasu na ekranie niż Harvest. Czajcie fazę?
Almost every time we release a league, we later roll it into the core game with a chance to spawn in maps. Usually 10%, sometimes 5%. When Ritual is added to the core game, we are standardizing this rate at 8%, which means a small decrease for some leagues and an increase for Harvest. We have rebalanced other things to compensate, like the rate at which heist rogues level up. Most Atlas passive trees have the same increase in chance for bonus content, meaning they now offer more than double the chance of encountering your preferred content. So I just spent a ton of time describing lots of buffs to Path of Exile's different reward systems, and
No
there was
się
one
Chris
nerf that I
nagadał
left
teraz.
to last. And this gives us a nerf to a league that I kind of care about a bit. Talisman was one that I kind of led the design on, and players joke that it's my favorite league. Now, in the 3.12.3 content update, there was a change to talismans. Basically, they weren't good enough, so the team decided to add a random anointment to them, which made them a lot more powerful, and
Dokładnie,
also
no.
to juice up the mods to make them well-rolled.
No, dokładnie.
And that
no.
was overkill. Like, as you've seen recently, talismans have just been dropping with insane mods and great anointments.
To
And we
prawda,
felt
niektóre
in this
talizmany były
expansion,
pojebane.
especially because you can use tainted oils in order to redo the anointments on
No
talismans.
właśnie,
because
kurwa,
now you
właśnie
can
to powiedziałem
modify
przed chwilą.
corrupted amulets. Honestly, they don't need the well-rolled mods anymore, and so we've removed that. Talismans are still compelling, but they're not quite where they were in the last league.
Czyli nie będą tak zajebiste jak teraz, ale
Every
będzie
Path of
można
Exile
anoint zmieniać.
expansion needs new ways for players to slaughter their enemies.
It's
In
fucked
Path of Exile Ultimatum, this takes the form of 4 new skill gems and 4 support gems. In line with Ultimatum's Val theme, these gems focus on blood, the idea of spending life rather than mana to use your skills. Alongside the new skill and support gems, we've also made some adjustments to the low life mechanic, including changing the low life threshold to 50%. This makes it much easier and safer to stay on low life. for
Low
builds
life jest
where
od
it matters.
50% teraz, nie od 30%.
Typically, when
Siema,
players
Douglas.
create low-life builds, they rely on Energy Shield to protect themselves against incoming damage. The new skill Petrified Blood enables low-life builds to instead use some of their life pool to absorb hits. While it's active, you can't recover life above 50% through any method other than flasks. Sources of life recovery like life regeneration and life leech only apply to the bottom half of your life pool. Additionally, a portion of incoming hit damage that affects the lower half of your life pool is spread out over time rather than being applied instantly. Corrupting Fever consumes a chunk of your life and grants you a buff that causes all your hits to apply Corrupted Blood to your enemies. Corrupted Blood stacks up with each hit, causing more and more physical damage over time. When you have consumed a certain amount of life to cast skills from your
O
life pool,
kurwa,
the buff
Corrupting
duration
Blood
refreshes.
skill, który nakłada
Essentially, as long as you're
bleed.
consuming life to use skills,
Stakuje,
you'll be
nie?
causing damage over time to stack on enemies. Be careful though. The Exsanguinate skill shoots tendrils of blood in front of you at the cost of life rather than mana. In addition to a strong physical damage hit, it also applies a physical damage over time debuff, which can stack
Jaki
up to
fajny
3
skill
times.
w ogóle,
You
ty.
can also support Exsanguinate so that its tendrils chain from one target to the next.
Chainuje
Breathe
się
conjures a
raczej.
giant bloody scythe that swings across the
Omówiłem, że
select
to jest
area,
nowy skill, bo
applying
tego nie
strong
było.
hit damage and physical damage over time. Each use of the skill causes it to gain a charge that scales its damage up and increases its life cost up to
Ale
5
szybki
times.
build.
These charges drop off over time as well as after killing enemies, making Reap very powerful at stacking up damage against single targets. We've also added 2 new support gems that have split the existing blood magic support
Arrogance
into 2
support.
separate support gems.
Increased
The
aura
first of
effect.
these is the Arrogance support, which causes supported skills to reserve life instead of mana, and also provides an increase to the effect of auras that it supports. Just like the original blood magic support gem, the
Właśnie, blood
reservation
magic.
multiplier diminishes as the gem levels up.
A,
The
spoko.
life tap support gem causes supported skills to cost life instead of mana.
Life top
Once you've
support,
consumed a
zajebiste.
certain amount of life to use a skill, you gain life tap, which increases your damage for a few seconds.
O kurwa, 20%
The
more
cruelty
damage.
support gem grants a buff called Cruelty, which increases the damage over time you deal with supported skills.
Znowu
It
more.
also boosts the hit damage from supported skills, and the Cruelty buff gets stronger the harder you hit.
Widziałem,
This
220
gem is
podoba.
designed as an additional option for builds that focus on both hits and damage over time. The Bloodthirst support gem is a new option for low life attackers. This gem adds a percentage of your life as physical weapon damage while you're on low life, letting low life attack based builds really
Kurwa, ale
scale
biegaj
their
sobie,
damage, which
biegaj
wasn't
sobie z
an
takim
option
życiem jak
before.
ten typ, przecież to chłopie strach na dzielni jest.
Alongside a Val-themed expansion and blood-themed gems, it felt right to take the opportunity to improve Val skills, which are supercharged versions of regular gems that charge up with the souls of your slain enemies to deal huge bursts of damage.
O, SS Drain, szanuję.
One of the main improvements is that you now get far more souls for Val skills from damaging unique enemies, so your Val skills will recharge faster against bosses. We've also improved the Atziri's Rain unique jewel. Alongside increasing the duration of your Val skills, it also grants a chance to regain all consumed souls. Val skills have also received a balance pass that you can check out in the full Path of Exile Ultimatum patch notes in a
kurwa.
few days. So we've covered most of the key components
No,
that make up Path of
Lukasonek,
Exile
który mi
Ultimatum.
kupisz
Keep
supporter
an eye
pack?
on news over the next week
Łukasz.
as we reveal the finer details of what's
Kupisz mi
coming.
jeden? Ej, Łukasz,
We'll move
mówisz,
on
że
to the
fajne są.
Q&A shortly to answer your burning questions, but first let's have a quick look at the new supporter packs that are available right now to celebrate the launch of Ultimatum
Będziemy Big
and help
Brothers.
fund ongoing development of Path of
Który
Exile.
chcesz? Jeszcze nie wiem jakie są.
The Silver Crescent and Imperial Sun supporter packs come with masses of points to spend in the store, social frames, forum titles and badges, a download of the digital soundtrack, and of course, exclusive cosmetic microtransactions such as armor sets, alternate helmets, and weapon skins. The Silver Crescent series has an exclusive portal effect, and the Imperial Sun series has an exclusive aura effect. Each series has 2 packs, and the smaller packs can be upgraded to
aura
their respective
fajna,
large
ale
pack
co
anytime
to
while they're
kurwa
still on
jest?
sale. These are, of course, in addition to the new core packs that were released at the end of last year. Remember to check those out if you haven't already. Thank you so much for your support. Purchases of these supporter
Co to
packs
za
are the
syf?
only thing that fund ongoing development of Path of Exile, its
Oh,
sequel
kurwa.
Path of Exile 2, and expansions like Ultimatum. The
What the
reveals we
heck?
showed you today are already live on YouTube for you to link to your friends in case they missed the live stream.
Ale
Please
takie
do
dwa
so,
na-
we're keen to get a big turnout on the
Jeżeli już
release
bym
of Ultimatum
miałbyś
next
kupować,
week.
to ja bym chyba
But we've
kupił
got
ten
plenty
drugi,
more
nie?
reveals planned for the rest of the
Ale
year.
one nie był taki
There's a
jakiś
lot more Path of
zajebisty.
Exile 2 stuff to show off, and we've
Zaś
also
nie
got some
zarabiał
new
na mnie,
progress on
kapę
Path of
jakaś.
Exile Mobile we're keen to share with you as well.
Paweł w Exile Mobile.
Anyway, if you have any
Lol.
questions from what we've shown you today, please get them ready because I'm about to be joined by Ziggy D as we do a Q&A based on your questions from Twitch chat.
Siemanko, tutaj ekipa z Polski. Od Jointera mamy takie pytanie. Chrisu, co ty odjebałeś z tymi supporter pakami? Dawać mi te skrzydła? Chyba bez Nemesis, bo za duży płacz burzy HOP. No, czyli kurwa jeszcze zboostowali, chłopie, jeszcze więcej headhunterów będzie. Nie wiem, czy to dobrze zrozumiałem, ale teraz można będzie headhuntera wydropić z każdej mapy. Z każdej mapy, nie trzeba mieć Nemesis, więc headhunterów będzie jeszcze więcej. Znaczy, wiecie, wiecie jak to jest wydropić headhuntera, nie? Raz na ligę wydropicie może. Chyba, że ktoś się stara tak jak ja i robi Magic Finda i jusuje i gra po 8 godzin dziennie na przykład. To może wydropicie więcej. Ale generalnie to, że nie będzie... Ancient Orby dalej będą zajebiste. Bo wydropienie Headhuntera to nie jest takie hop siup, nie? Zawsze Ancient Orbowanie będzie najkrótszą drogą, żeby dostać Headhuntera, nie? Mi wydaje, że... Tylko, że teraz będziesz mógł stać w hideoutie i na kurwecie Ancient Orby, nie? Jeżeli usunęli w ogóle wymóg posiadania legacy mapy, czyli w tym przypadku Nemesis, żeby zrobić Ancientami Headhuntera, to równie dobrze można teraz w hideoutie go zrobić. Nie? Powinno się, bo tak. To, co kiedyś było memem, stanie się prawdą. Zapytajmy. Zobacz, czy dałeś Nemesis na mapę. No, chłopie. Zrobimy taki test. Kupimy 500 Ancient Orbów i spróbujemy zrobić Headhuntera w hideoutie. Jak po 500 nie wejdzie, to kupimy następne 500, jak po 1000 nie wejdzie, to będę prawie pewien, że ci nie. Nie, kurwa, niech do map dodadzą Delirium. Skąd wiesz, że dodadzą Delirium? A niech dodadzą. Jeżeli to jest chyba jakiś scam? Czemu? Spoko, daj mini, bo have fun. Jak ktoś odebrał już skrzydła. A, dobra, okropnie wyglądają? O kurwa, a co ty za darmo chciałeś? Nerf talizman to taki mem trochę, no trochę w sumie. O kurwa, ale zajebiście tam. Ja muszę ogarnąć, co to się z tym Headhunterem tam działo. Dzieje. Nie no, oglądamy jeszcze te Q&A, bo Q&A jest dobre, nie? Q&A to tam wiecie, pytania prosto z beczki, tam Ziggy się nie będzie pierdolił, tam będziesz pytał jakieś pod włos. Improvementy do starych lig? Tak, te wszystkie Abyss, Incursion to oni to pozmieniali, poboostowali, żeby to na to... Ale wiecie co jest dojebane? Bo on tam mówił, że w tej nowej lidze, w Ultimatum, jak będziecie mogli wybrać sobie arenę, nie? Na przykład pierwszą nagrodę, wybieracie jaką arenę chcecie i jakie mody. Robicie tą arenę, dostajecie jakąś nagrodę, myślicie chujowa nagroda, albo zwijacie interes i spadacie dalej, albo bierzecie następny level i możecie mieć wtedy 2 nagrody, ale mody się stakują. No siema.
G'day folks and welcome back to another very exciting reveal and Q&A session with the one and only Chris Wilson. Good morning, Chris.
Siema.
Hey, thanks for having me.
How are you feeling about the reactions so far?
I'm pretty hyped actually. That was a lot of stuff to cover and it was really cool watching.
Tak,
Twitch
drodzy,
chat.
oglądaj streama po prostu, jak
Yeah,
masz
this
włączone konto.
method of doing the reveals, how are you liking it? It seems like last time it was jam-packed full of stuff and there's almost like not a second to breathe between different things, so it's a lot to digest.
Yeah, I like this method of showing stuff and getting a chance to discuss it and explain things, and it's quite personal to get a
Dobra,
chance to like
tłumaczę.
interact with the
Siema,
community
Bukazi,
about the
witam.
actual changes as they're announced, as opposed to dumping the information on our website and then reading
Hype so
Reddit.
strong.
So
No
it's,
czekaj, bo
it's a
na
lot
razie
more
mamy
fun.
wywiad z
That's good
Kciukiem.
stuff.
Na razie
So I'm going
tutaj
to jump
Ziggy z
straight into
Kciukiem gada.
PoE2 things first. The ones that stood out to me were definitely spears and crossbows. Two things that I've been very excited to potentially see in PoE one day. I remember asking years and years ago whether we'd get stuff like spears and crossbows. And it was kind of like always maybe, probably not. It's a lot of work to make the animations for new things like that. So what led to the decision to add 2 new weapon types? PoE2?
Well, you mentioned animations, and that's actually part of the reason. So previously, the old way we were creating animations in Path of Exile, where the way the character rigs were set up, just made it really hard to add a lot of new ones. But one of the things with Path of Exile 2 is we can quite trivially add a lot more animations to the characters. And so new weapon types are totally fair game, and we've got some interesting ideas there. And of course, spears and crossbows are both iconic action RPG ones that we hadn't done yet, so it makes sense to put them in PoE 2.
I imagine that new rigging system then makes it easier to make more skills, but also more interesting and dynamic skills potentially.
Absolutely, and this custom animation for each skill, basically. A lot of the Path of Exile 1 skills will use whatever animation is appropriate. Sometimes new animations, of course, but it's often kind of the closest animation we have, whereas in PoE 2, we're pretty much animating everything we can by hand.
Awesome stuff. Now, chat, we have some pre-prepared questions to give you time to formulate and ask some questions, but do ask questions in chat. We have some helpful people in the background taking questions, which we'll ask after some ones that I've already prepared. So firstly, asking about spears and crossbows further.
Dzięki
they
Misiek,
each have
witam.
implicit skills.
Siema.
How many of these
Dzięki
are
za
there?
słupka, witam.
So this is a number that keeps on growing. We basically showed you the ones we've got working so far, and we expect that to grow, of course, by release. So we have a
Dzięki za 8.
reasonable stable for each. In terms of the crossbow ones, for example, there's currently 2 main skills that are built into the crossbows you've seen. We hope to add several more. So there's the Cascade one and Power Shot. There'll be several more damage shapes coming. And then in terms of damage types, we showed you 3 types of bolts. And yes, I understand that the sound of changing between them got annoying in the video, but this is something we're experimenting with. And if we keep it in, it will definitely be an option. That's actually an homage to the 2012 Dread movie. So, we find it funny at least. Anyway, there's 3 of those ammo types working in the game at the moment, but we'll clearly add a lot more. And so the exponential number of final combinations will be pretty high.
So did you say like 7 damage shapes?
We've got there's 2 damage shapes currently. That's the cascade and the power shot, and we're looking to add several more. So several rather than 7. But that that could be quite a high number overall. Basically, we want to find ones that fit themes for base types of crossbows, and so ideally the end game crossbows will support several of these damage shapes at quite high skill levels, and so you'll have a lot of choice as to what you want to use in your end game build.
Możesz cały czas dostać
Interesting.
skrzydła. Oglądaj streama po
This is
prostu, jak
pretty
masz
interesting
połączone
distinction
konto z
between like the
Twitchem.
damage shapes and the damage types. So I guess this is the first like modular skills like that. Like you could always convert damage types or add different types of damage and stuff like that, but these are the first like skills where effectively they're in 2 separate parts. So the support gems also link to the bolts, the damage type aspect of it, and not the actual damage shape thing, the bolt itself. Or the power shot. Gotcha.
Są na
And
koncie,
that's this is
pokażę
the
wam
new
potem
skill
jak je
gem system,
odebrać, bo
obviously.
trzeba kliknąć na jedną
Now
rzecz, żeby je
grants
odebrać i
skills
mieć w
based on
grze.
the item sockets, and then you sock it into a completely separate menu.
Musisz
which
dać view
sees
rewards.
glimpses
Jak
of
dostaliście skrzydła, to
there,
dajcie
which,
dajcie view rewards i
look
wtedy wam
forward to
się
seeing
tak
how that
jakby
plays out.
odświeży to i dostaniecie w
Is
grze.
this concept of like unique weapon skills going to be extended out to other weapon types?
It may do. We're still working out what we're doing with each one of the weapon types, and there's a lot of interesting ideas there. Some of them will probably gain skills, some of them will just have other ways to identify themselves. I'll give you another example. So you know how in Path of Exile at the moment, daggers and claws are basically the same thing, right? They're both dex and they, use similar types of skills and so on.
No.
So an example of the small tweak we're making there is that claws will count for unarmed skills in Path of Exile 2. So all of the unarmed builds can now use claws. And if you've ever played, Facebreak, you'll understand quite a bit of potential there. And so we're trying where possible to make smart decisions with the base types. But of course, if we had to add a lot of work to them to make them unique, then we'll definitely do so.
Nice, Keltar.
Wow, okay. I'm seeing a few questions already about kind of like distinctions between PoE 1 and PoE 2 here. People asking things like, does that mean spears and crossbows can't be used in PoE 1?
So that's tricky because it's technically possible to get Path of Exile 2 items on your Path of Exile 1 characters in the end game because of the shared end game nature of it. And so if we don't have animation support for the old character classes, we're still working out what to do there. It's one of the problems we're going to have to solve.
Right, okay. And on that note, I guess, how will we be handling accommodating new weapon types in the existing skill tree as well? It's getting big.
Right. So from a skill tree point of view, we haven't announced what we're doing yet with Path of Exile 2's skill tree. There's going to be some interesting stuff. And of course, it's going to accommodate all the weapon types it supports. It may be that Path of Exile 1 characters and hence their skill tree don't necessarily support the new weapon types. And you have to play a Path of Exile 2 character to get them. But we kind of expect that by the time that Path of Exile 2 is out and ready, a lot of people are going to be choosing to play Path of Exile 2 characters because of the vast amount of new content there.
Kurwa, proste chyba, nie? Wyjdzie po E2, ktoś będzie grał Achu i zagram sobie kampanię z PoE1.
Will the existing campaign be like just a direct one-to-one port, or will it be seeing like PoE2 upgrades applied to it as well retroactively? And for like, I guess, how long will it be supported in the future in that way?
Right. So, 1 second. I just got a note, by the way, on the last question from the team that all of the existing Path of Exile 1 characters are going to be swapped over to use the Path of Exile 2 rigs, which adds full support for using spears and crossbows on them. So that's information I did not know, which is actually very helpful, and the team have obviously thought of that. With regard to the, campaign itself, we're incidentally getting upgrades whenever we improve assets that are used in both campaigns. We want, where possible, to take the best of Path of Exile 1 and improve it for Path of Exile 2. And so when we do that, it upgrades it in Path of Exile 1. And so there are also places where we intentionally revamp Path of Exile 1 stuff, like what we did with Lionized Watch. And so the campaign will continue to receive improvements in this way. It's still a fully maintained game. Like, it's a product that we are monetizing and maintaining and
Tak, Kejvero, od 40 levelu.
But at the same time, we're intentionally putting most of our development efforts into making a new Path of Exile 2 campaign that fixes, perceived problems with the way the Path of Exile works. And so it'll be a bit of a patchwork quilt, I suspect, in a few years, where some of the content will date back to the early 2000s, 2010s, and some of it will be brand new.
Ja mówiłem, że tak będzie, że w tym roku nie będzie. Bo oni zrobili ekspansję Echo of the Atlas i to będzie trwało cały rok, nie? Tam 4 ligi będą.
Stream showed like quite a slowdown in content in PoE 2, and it was talked about previously that it will be a bit of a pullback in terms of overall game speed. Is that still the case? Where are you looking to kind of pitch the speed of PoE 2 compared to PoE 1?
We want Path of Exile 2 to be a slightly more claustrophobic personal experience, but we understand that when presented with that, players find ways to make their characters go fast, because after all, these games are measured on what items you find, and that's in direct proportion to how many monsters you kill, and that's in direct proportion to how fast you can go. So yes, it is a game where people will end up going fast. All of the crazy character builds and more are still possible. So I would rather expect that Path of Exile's speed continues to be a high-speed game once we hit the end game and people get their character builds established.
No dokładnie.
But we still have to try as hard as possible to make it a compelling experience for people that want to play at a normal pace as well. And so while we played at a normal pace through that particular showcase there, it's possible to run through, right? You can, be very smart
Trzymaj
about
się,
which
Kejwera.
monsters you kill. You
Grzechu,
can
dwóch
do the
grzechów.
whole thing rather quickly if you're a racer. So yes, we're trying to make things a bit slower, but we're not doing it in a way that's going to hurt the spirit of Path of Exile because we understand how people like to play and we want to support
Oni
them.
oni chcą zrobić tak,
Right.
żeby ludzie, którzy wolniej grają,
I remember hearing that
Wrócili
both
do tych
campaigns would
samych
be
grałem
roughly
się bardzo
similar
szybko.
length, and the new one's 7 acts
Okej.
compared to 10 acts. So I imagine things like boss fights and certain encounters and stuff like that will be like more difficult and longer than comparable encounters in the previous campaign. There, right?
Wow.
Yeah, and that's partly because when we were making the mini bosses in Path of Exile 1, it was literally a matter of, oh, let's take a bandit and let's scale it up and give it a name and throw heavy strike on it, and that's a boss, if you see what I mean. Let's take a
No.
rower and retexture it and put an aura on, and that's a boss. Whereas here we're planning them into the levels. We think of an idea for a level and say, what would be the coolest thing we can put in this level? And then we build that in. And so it means the boss fights are significantly more complicated and interesting. And I don't expect that's going to slow players down a lot because we're not like throwing vulnerability phases into those mini bosses necessarily. But, they're certainly going to be interesting fights at the very least.
Oh.
And it was talked about making bosses more rewarding as well.
It's
Do you
amazing,
think like the
man.
average boss in PoE2, since they're going to be harder, is also potentially going to be more rewarding as well?
We want to make sure the rewards are pitched at a good level there, and the changes to the rewards of bosses in Path of Exile 1 is just making sure it's worth your time actually going and farming them. If you go and do an Act 10 Katava run, we want it so that you actually get some decent items, and it's worth repeating that process when gearing up for maps. Now, of course, it's probably still more profitable to just go and play maps, but some people want to just get themselves ready before they start expending currency on every area they run.
I do have a bit of a nostalgia for like farming piety and dominus back in the earlier days of PoE2 or PoE, so I'd be interested to see if there's more of that in PoE2 or even sooner, I guess, since a lot of these changes are coming very soon.
Jest
Matarik
taki,
asks,
taka
will
po
Path of
tym
Exile
jest taka
2 be
podróbka
sticking to a
shapecastu.
3-month league-based
Tak jak my
cycle
mamy
like PoE1,
shapecast, to
or
oni
is there any
mają
intentions to
backlass,
change
nie?
this at this point?
Od nas to
We're
ten.
pretty happy with the 3-month cycle. It's a good duration. We haven't decided, obviously, yet, and it depends a little bit on when Path of Exile 2 is coming out and how it works around dates that year. But yeah, we do expect to continue the league cycle, and it will be quite nice actually getting to make the first leagues for Path of Exile 2 and designing those because it'll be a fresh game where we can find things that integrate really well.
Seno, ty
into
już
it,
w sumie od
and,
słupka sobie
you know,
wjebałeś
it's gonna be quite
samobuja, jakby nie
interesting.
patrzeć. Znaczy on ci wjebał.
Cheesy asks, will there be any options to like reduce graphics for PoE2 since it's looking like a a much prettier game? Is it going to be a bit harder on like PC hardware than the current game?
O, właśnie,
It
właśnie.
certainly has higher requirements, but we're looking into various technology like dynamic level of detail stuff and various other bits and pieces. And a lot of the engine improvements that have been made over the last few years are with a view to us basically never dropping frame rate and finding smart ways, like the dynamic resolution scaling and various other bits and pieces. If you're IO bound, for example, it uses placeholder textures and so on. And it's a fine balance, of course, between making sure this performs well and always looks good. But the intention is that we can run Path of Exile 2 on a wide variety of systems.
We saw a lot of really nice looking UI improvements in the
Siema,
PoE2
Biegaro.
trailers. I especially liked the boss bars and even for separate boss bars next to each other and dynamically changing and stuff like that was really cool. Is there going to be more UI customization in the future for PoE, especially something that's
Nice,
I
Jabłoń.
guess bothered me in the past?
A
is, like,
przeczytałem
being
to, że
able
masz
to do
nogę w
more
gipsie,
customization for
przerąbane.
things like
Możesz
buffs and
napisać, co
debuffs and,
zrobiłeś.
change which things are displayed and their locations.
I suspect that if we were to make changes like that, we'd look into rolling it into Path of Exile as soon as they're ready. But it's a difficult line between deciding the right place for the players so they can focus on playing versus allowing full customization. And we kind of prefer to just let players get on with playing the game and not allow them to completely change their UI. And this is for a few other reasons as well. From a branding point of view, it's nice if the game looks consistent on each person's computer. And I know that sounds like marketing speak, but it is something where we want to make sure that the game is recognizably a Path of Exile. In addition, from a quality assurance point of view, having it so that there's a infinitely permutable UI, of course, makes it significantly harder for us to test patches. But these are all things we have to balance against the actual usability, and we do like the idea of adding more QOL there. From a UI point of view, by the way, I'd encourage viewers to have another look at the UI, like the HUD in the footage we just showed, because there's some interesting technology used there that I'm going to see if they can notice.
Was it the pretty boy around the health bar or something else?
That's one of the many benefits. We're rendering it in 3D now, so there's some very interesting lighting stuff.
Dojebane
Very
to
nice.
wygląda. No
Yeah,
kurwa,
I
ta
saw
gra
some
wygląda
like
ładnie.
interesting lighting changes and some green stuff swooshing over the UI. That might be
Przecież
what you're
powiedział,
hinting
że
at
oni,
actually,
że
'cause
oni
that's
chcą,
something I
żeby
noticed,
PoE
but I didn't know
kojarzyło
what
się
it was about.
wszystkim, że na każdym komputerze ma taką samą
Anyway, time to scrub
optymalizację.
over the
I
VOD
tylko
as
takie
well after the
KW.
Q&A. But Raccoon is asking basically if we're going to be getting more of the integration of things like trading UIs and stuff like that in game, and also similarly, the ideas that were talked about in the past about having the possibility of transferring items like across instances and stuff like that, cross instance trading.
The change that's most likely to come is an integration of the trade websites into the game client, where people can basically like interact with stuff more easily without actually having to leave the game. And that means that, for example, if you see an item in the in-game trade site browser as such, you can click on it to whisper the person directly without having to copy and paste stuff around. That's more likely as the direction that we're going to go. We've talked
Nie
about
aż
our views on
Alice.
trade for quite a while, about how it is
To będzie raczej
important
bardzo
that
szybko,
there are
wiesz? Bo to
some
głównie
barriers
chodzi o
to
API,
instant
które...
acquisition of items in order to encourage players to actually play the game to find items while still being able to trade if they want to. And our views on that are still pretty similar. So we don't expect
aplikacje
to
używają tylko
put it this way. If we were going to dramatically
to
revamp how trade works,
Albo
we'd just
ninja
do
i
it. We
innych
wouldn't
takich,
wait
co
until
tam
Path of
wybierzesz.
Exile 2.
I'd like to talk a little bit
Chuj z
about
tym.
Ultimatum. It's on the surface,
Będzie
it looks
łatwiej
quite
szybko.
similar to Ritual, and I heard a lot of people pointing that out. What are the key differences in your mind between Ultimatum and Ritual then?
Well, the similarity that we have here is that it's a in-area combat league where you encounter the encounter and then fight some monsters and get some rewards. And this is as opposed to going on a grand heist or collecting, beasts, for example. And so that's kind of where the similarities end, though.
You will
because
find the encounter in
after that
encounter in
point,
encounter
the
in
difference is that
encounter.
Ultimatum gives you a very fine
Nice.
granular control over the difficulty and reward that you're getting. So you have the ability to add up to, I'm going to say up to 10, because that's where it goes in the end game, but usually 6 up to 10 modifiers to the fight that are your choice. You're presented with different options. If you don't want a certain constraint, you just don't have to add that one. And so you're kind of customizing the fight by essentially adding mods that further make it more difficult. And if you're lucky, you'll get an
Zajebiste.
automation
Podoba
run
mi się
where
to
the mods
Ultimatum.
don't affect your character. in a
Oczywiście to będzie
negative
chujowe,
way
bo
and
to
you find it
generalnie
an easier
będzie
time.
spowalniało, będziesz
Sometimes
musiał
you're
się
just
zatrzymać
fighting
przy
through a
tym głównym
slog, really
monolicie
hard
i
stuff.
klikać to, nie?
And so
Ale...
the rewards escalate kind of exponentially here. Like the intention here isn't that you just make your way through the 6 to 10 rounds pretty easily and get your 6 to 10 rewards and walk away. The intention is it gets difficult and you have to make a choice of actually stopping.
Im dalej
We
się
want
idzie
to
w tych
even good
rytuałach, tym
players while
lepszy...
playing through the campaign will reach a point where they say, okay, I've just got to take this stuff and leave. I can't risk the next round because there's an actual 50% chance that I'm going to screw it up and lose all my stuff. And so this is the first league that people are going to be failing encounters even if they know how to play the game. And that's because they can choose how far they want to take it. Which is different than Ritual, because in Ritual it's expected that you're going to kill the monsters, you're going to get your rewards. Here, the rewards are a lot better, but will you get them?
I do like those risk-reward leagues where you get to have a bit more of a gamble. You pointed out like the idea of the Val thing being the potential of loss. On the note of loss, some of the reward
Chuj,
choices
zrobię jeszcze
were things
jedną.
like put an
Ej,
exalt in and
dobra,
put a
odpalę jeszcze
stack of
jedną
exalts
arenę,
or
co
something
tam?
and
Myślę,
then
że jestem
double it.
dobry, mam 9000
Woody
HP
Garrett
skapowane
actually
rasy.
asks how rare are the doubling
Jointer
of the
rip.
currency ultimatums?
I'm going to ask the team that, guys. How rare are the inscribed ultimatums?
Siema Bob, witam. Jointer lag.
Right, so there's a lot of variety in what they reward. You obviously want the ones that double a lot of currency, but you're generally finding an inscribed ultimatum approximately every 20 maps. I should note, of course, that that number will probably change by the time it's released. We're right now with a week to go, tweaking that number on an hourly basis, basically, as we playtest. In addition, these things are tradable. So it's one of those things where a lot of people, when they get one, are going to say, you put 5 exalts in, get 10 out. Therefore, it's worth up to 5 exalts profit. I'm going to sell it for 4. And then they list it. And then someone else is like, well, that's an easy 1 exalt profit for me to get that and just do it because their character is a god. And so we're expecting a lot of people to just dump them on the economy for sale and a lot of people to just buy these up for easy profits because they know they can handle those mods.
I was a little concerned that you might not have the thing for the ritual, but it seems like every ritual that requires you to put something in is one of those
właśnie,
itemized
kurwa.
ones that you can prepare for and only
Tam
when
było
you
coś
have
takiego, że możecie
the
dostać void baterii, jak
The
włożycie chyba jakąś
ultimatums that have
przepowiednię czy
a
coś.
specific thing you have to bring are itemized ones, so you know this is going to require, like for example, there's some that upgrade a good unique to an incredibly good unique, and so it might say bring this item and get out accounts or something like that, and therefore you just have to trade for the item when you've got the inscribed ultimatum.
Albo jest też taka przepowiednia,
What item
Whispering
get out
chyba,
of
coś
town?
tam.
Sorry, I'm just...
Whispering
Well,
coś
it'll
tam chyba mi
depend.
się
There are
pomyliło,
pools
ale
that are
no,
fixed
wiecie o
from
co
it, so
chodzi.
sometimes you
Chodzi mi o
get
to,
ones
że trzeba
with
coś
close in value,
przynieść.
sometimes you get ones with a big difference in value, and those are obviously worth more.
Oh, so there's actually things like it requires a specific unique that you can hunt down and then
Exactly.
put in.
Usually with a value difference between the two that's considerable. But our goal is
No
basically,
właśnie,
it's
tak,
got the
to.
feeling of double or nothing on those kind of ultimatums.
Nice. Awesome.
Double or nothing, harvest, crafting. To nigdy nie
Warass
chodziło.
8 asks, will the other skills get reworked, buffed, nerfed this time around, or is there any mechanical nerf to existing things?
Is that in reference to regular skills in the core game with the ultimatum release?
Yeah.
We do have the usual patch notes coming out, but we try to cover basically just new stuff that we were doing with regard to skills. I don't know the extent of the changes to the other stuff. I will quickly check. Guys, regular skill changes. There's some nerfs and a couple of buffs, so
Classic.
just seeing what people think about that. But no, I mean, nerfs are obviously for a reason. It's to keep the game good, and we, philosophically on that, we
Dobrze,
would
nerfić
rather
wszystko.
gently
Ziemi.
nerf things that are right at the
Biachu!
top, and then have to
Biachu!
fundamentally change the entire game to
Nerfy.
achieve the same balance thing in a roundabout way that players don't notice for a while. So it is a much more direct approach that we're taking these days.
Co
If
by nie
something is
zrobili,
just
tak
breaking
będzie
the game
płacz.
through power, we'll cut a little bit off the top. Generally, whenever we do that, we're thinking it's still really good. Why are people so angry? And then they settle down after they've actually used it. So we are trying to make sure that the nerfs are just taking a bit of the power off the top and keeping the thing viable and
Uśmiechnął
fun
się
still.
tam, leci kurwa asasyn pewnie do
There was
piachu.
a new unique that had like a ton of keystones on it, including one
O,
new
pojebany
keystone,
ten
which I'm
unique był,
guessing
no.
we'll have to wait to see what that's all about, right?
Yep.
Are the other keystones on that item random, or are they set?
They're a set of keystones. This is a group of Val keystones that work in interesting ways together, kind of like a puzzle for people to solve. So it'll be quite interesting to see how people work out how to play that character.
No
It's
bez
a
kitu, będą buildy
hand-tailored,
pod to pewnie, ktoś to
character
rozkmini.
build
Na pewno chociaż jedna
challenge
osoba to
that the devs are
rozkmini.
putting forward to the community.
Think of it as like a designer's cut version of Path of Exile. This is the true way to play, right?
6
So,
keystonów i
CI
zrób na tym
Got
builda,
it.
nie? Trzeba będzie
Very
pijama,
nice.
trzeba będzie pijama zatrudnić ich tam rozkmini.
Moving down a little bit. Lexi
Siema,
wants to know,
gumiak.
will like map mods affect ultimatums that you find, or I further addendums to that. What sort of things do affect ultimatums?
So guys, what mods affect ultimatums? They're asking about like map mods, for example.
When you run it inside the map, then it by all
Mhm.
the item
Ile razy doszedłeś?
ultimatum,
Ja jeszcze nie wstałem z
they
fotela.
aren't affected by any map.
Siedzę cały czas.
Bonus to master game.
Nadchodzi keystone
Right.
stacker.
So it works pretty much how you would expect. If you're playing a regular map that has mods, then the ultimatum that you find in that map, just a regular one, will be fully affected by the mods. The inscribed ones are their own maps unto themselves, and so they don't have map mods because they're not rollable, but they do have a bonus to make them equivalent to decent maps.
Right. I imagine there's probably going to be some pretty brutal combinations and
Gratulacje,
certain
Dratlas.
added damage types with certain modifiers that the actual ultimatums in maps give as well, since I noticed
Yes,
there's various things like
that's correct.
swords appearing and skewering you.
Na
this is very
Twitchu
much about
musisz
actually
wejść na
reading
swoje
the mods
konto i
and
tam
making sure
daj
your
view
character can
rewards w
handle
Manage
it, right? There'll be
Connections, tam gdzie
ultimatums where you
łączyłeś
want to
konto
get a
z
friend to
Twitchem i
help
tam daj
because that
view
friend
rewards
is
i
kind of
powinno ci
impervious
wtedy
to whatever it
włączyć.
is that's going
Nie
to
masz
make it hard for
wyżej.
you. And as we mentioned, we've made party play actually work really well this time, as opposed to being an afterthought.
I'm very excited about that concept actually as well. I've been playing most of the recent leagues co-op with my partner, and yeah, it's a mixed bag. Some leagues are really good for co-op, and others just kind of
Nie, no to
don't
jest buff
exactly
stary.
work.
Bo
So it seems like
będziesz
there's been a lot of thought there. Just to kind of clarify,
przy tempie waszego
each person
biegania
gets
to
their
ten.
own separate rewards.
Przy tempie
effectively
biegania
from, and they can,
blabranerów,
like,
jak będziesz mógł jeszcze
tap out
targetować
and take their
jeden tam
reward
z
whenever they
czterech, no
want.
to
Yes,
zajebiście.
That's correct.
If someone does tap out, can they like stay in the area and help you finish your fight? But they're just like their reward sequence ends. I imagine that's how it
My
works.
understanding is they're teleported outside it. Let me check.
In the regular game, they can still.
Right. Okay, so in the regular game, they can still help you out.
But they have to leave the map if it's the inscribed ones, then I'm guessing.
Yeah, how does it work with inscribed?
Inscribe one, only the person who puts the inscription gets the.
Got
gains
it.
the item.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, I guess this was sensible and I should have worked that out. I mean, inscribed ones that has a specific thing that you're gambling and a specific thing you're receiving. And
No,
so that's
100%, no.
it's only that occurs, if you see what I mean. So, for
Ah.
example, you and I are sitting there looking at a 5 to 10 exalt one. And so we're going to come up with 5 exalts. We're going to put it in the window and we're going to get 10 once, regardless of the fact that there's 2 of us.
Right.
If we want to play it together and make it a bit harder, because there's multiple players, we can do. But it isn't 5 exalts each.
Yeah, otherwise you'd have a beastery situation again where like every person in the party gets a copy of the beast and then a copy of a copy and stuff like that.
Yes, exactly.
Copy
Oh,
of the
that's
copy
scary.
of the copy of the copy.
I can see why you went that
A
route.
tak
then.
by the way, rip split beasts.
Decoy wants to know if there is a boss fight in Ultimatum.
Maybe. I mean, watch the trailer again, I guess.
Nice. Swoovels Can you just leave the ring? Meaning the ultimatum ring.
My understanding is that you have to stay within the ring. Is that because it's a barrier or because it terminates if you?
If you're outside the ring for 5 seconds, it's failing.
Right. Okay. So standing outside the ring for 5 seconds counts as failing the encounter.
Oh, so you can dip out for a little bit if you need to catch your
Dip
breath
out.
and use the flask.
A, spoko. Nie
Yeah,
zrobili
that's
ta
an
zamkniętej
interesting
areny,
change,
tylko może
compared
wyjść
to
z tego
ritual
na
then,
5
which had
sekund
the hard
max.
barriers.
And this is also important for hardcore, of course, where when you're going to fail an encounter, it's better to do it by running away than by physically dying and losing your
Gumiak.
character.
Yep. Often that's the correct decision. Changing tack a little bit to some of the like previous league updates, which was a lot of things that people and myself have been
Ja
asking
sobie
for a
zrobiłem
long
cały
time.
Magic Find Gear,
Excited
nie?
about Veiled mod
Zesplitowałem,
changes.
więc już
Yes.
mam na standardzie. Nie
So
gram, ale...
the veiled mods themselves are now distinct from the craftable modifiers, and they're more powerful. How much higher are their power level compared to the crafted affixes?
No właśnie,
they
to jest
give you.
dobre.
So the ones that you unveil onto items are almost tier 1 in power. The intention is that they're really punchy, and if you get it, you can build a good item around that. The crafted ones are lower because you get the ability to just add them at will, and so they serve the same purpose. They're just not quite as good as if you actually make the item the correct way. The amount of difference between crafted and unveiled depends a lot on the actual mod. Some of them are closer, some of them are much further away.
Is there any ones that do like different things, like how we have some of the higher tier affixes?
A,
present
czyli
some
Violet będą
new
leciały te
mechanic or something
zajebiste,
like that, or is it
lepsze
just
niż te
generally
jeden
like,
z
here's more
bencha,
physical
zajebiście.
damage, that sort of thing?
I'll just confirm that.
To jest... Biwer,
Yeah, it's the same thing with numerical differences.
on się śmiał tylko, żeby sobie nakopiować,
so
dopóki to nie
veiled
wejdzie. Na
chaos orb
standardzie
allows you
pewnie.
to reroll an item and gives a
No bo
veiled
tam na
modifier
widzę.
on the item as well.
Yes.
And unveiling that, just to clarify, does give you crafting progress as well, so it's a way of unlocking those crafts faster.
Bo jak teraz
Yeah,
sobie nastakuję, to
veiled
później
chaos orbs
już nie
used for
będzie
crafting
mógł.
and unlocking. Yep, that's correct.
It said earlier in the presentation that the chaos orb drops are part of the core drop pool, right? Not like
Yes.
a betrayal specific thing. Okay, how common are they compared to like a regular chaos orb?
They're not very common. You want to get them through the betrayal system if you want to target farm them essentially, but you can find them. And the core drop pool thing is more about the fact that it's worthwhile killing monsters because from time to time you will actually find one. It will be an exciting thing. But like many things in the game, there's a more deterministic way to get them. This is actually a case of like, we initially really wanted to have it just as a betrayal reward, but I put a strong argument forward that we want the core drop pool to be compelling, and so it was added, but not particularly often. You'll see them, just not as much as you will from betrayal.
Makes sense. Can you use the veiled chaos orbs to put veiled mods on influence bases?
Yes, you can.
Awesome. That's looking forward to some interesting crafting combos here. And
Tak,
can you
każdy item
veil
może mieć jeszcze
chaos-
linka.
the character signature mods, like for example, Orion's minus mana cost.
No, you can't get those ones through that.
So those ones are still drop only from those specific characters.
Yeah.
Okay. How many previously league specific uniques are being added to the drop pool?
Way more than the 6 that we listed. It's like 100 or something.
cool.
Essentially, we looked at all the old league uniques, and there were kind of 2 ways you could get them. You could either get them by fighting content in that league, or
Dokładnie.
you could get them by
Nemesis.
killing some specific boss. And all the ones
Dokładnie.
that you get from specific bosses, like, Pale Council kind of stuff and so on, that stuff is still specific to those bosses. But every item that you could find by fighting league monsters that would drop because they're a monster of that league is now possible to get in the core drop pool. And so in one swoop, we have made Path of Exile's unique pools significantly more interesting in terms of stuff that you can find by just playing the regular game, while still meaning that the old leagues have their, interesting rewards.
And exactly how many headhunters am I going to find now?
So this is an interesting one, and the verdict is out on our math because on one hand, I want to start by saying Headhunter is like clearly in the sights of the balance team of being very unhappy with how powerful this item is, right? And I am putting my foot down and saying, no, Headhunter is an iconic part of Path of Exile. We're not nerfing it. It's going to stay.
Dokładnie,
awesome,
kurwa.
right?
Dobra, lubię gościa.
I'm representing the community here. Headhunter stays great. But the concession here is that we don't want...
Nie da się Silokoka, musisz mieć 40 level, żeby dropnąć
Here we
Headhuntera.
don't ninja to have a Headhunter equipped. We do want to make sure that it is a valuable item that's actually aspirational. And so part of the compromise here is you can get it in the core drop pool, obviously quite infrequently, but it's also a little bit harder to get from other sources as well. So obviously there's going to be a lot more of them because you can find them from regular monsters, but there's going to be fewer of them from the various other ancillary places you can get them. And so to some extent, this balances out a bit. So randoms are going to be fighting headhunters a bit more than the dedicated players because the deterministic farming of it is harder than it was before. It takes more ancient orb uses, for example. But technically, you can just chance your way into it earlier on without having to be in Nemesis content.
O kurwa!
And so Ideally, we will
Nerfią
see
szansę
Headhunter
Asian torgów?
remaining a completely amazing item because it has not been nerfed and still, being a viable thing for builds. It's just a little
Headhunter
bit more of a
hasn't
lottery
been
as to whether you
nerfed.
actually find it. And we think that's actually quite
Confirmation
important
granted.
in this kind of game because it means
Easy
that a
cup.
player who's not as
Easy
good,
cup.
not as lucky normally as other players, can just luck their way into something
To
that
co,
gives them a ton
idziemy
of
grać w
currency.
szachy?
And players who know what they're doing have
Na to
plenty of
czekałem.
deterministic options for still getting it and deterministic options for raising currency they can use to just trade for one if they need it.
I love the idea of like some first
Czyli to wygląda na to, że na przykład Ancient Orbami będzie ciężej go teraz zrobić.
This seems okay.
Bo
Well,
mówisz, że
that's-
teraz więcej
previously it
randomów
happened
i
with
więcej
mirrors,
randomowych
and it
ludzi,
happened
którzy
with
nie są
obscure rare items
dedykowanymi
they would never
ludźmi, którzy
notice, right? But
farmią
it
albo
was so cool
pracują te
watching some random
headhuntery.
player get something
tam
incredibly
ci będą
valuable
mieli
and it just
trudniej.
changes their game experience. And so we've just made sure that there's a lot of other options that they can find as well that are valuable.
Detective Jabsco asks, with
Wiecie, co
the
teraz nie
league
będzie
items
miało
being changed
sensu?
to global drops,
Nemesis
they lost
6
their
jest z
league
Legionu.
tags,
Po chuj
will
teraz
be
będzie
able to change
Nemesis
them
6 z Legionu.
outside of their league now.
Jak
My
teraz kurwa
understanding is
Nemesis
that
itemy
you
będą
will be
wypadać
able
ze
to
wszystkiego.
chance items that,
Albo z
because they're just
Blighta,
regulated
Nemesis chest.
in
To
the
może być
global
tak
drop
samo
pool again.
Unique
So my
chest.
understanding is you can just chance a headhunter if you're lucky.
Nie?
Okay, cool. So I'm excited to see the return of the Val reliquary keys. I quite like those. It's sad to see them gone for quite a while. It was mentioned that they are the rarest ever added to the game. How often will we see
Właśnie,
them?
tam
How
losy.
rare is
No
the
dużo
rare
rzeczy.
one?
Find them less often than the previous ones. And our goal here is that they are very treasured things that you find occasionally. We don't want an expectation that people play this league expecting to get a handful of these, right? They're pretty rare. And so it's a thing that you can hope to get.
O,
and if
następną
you trade for
rzecz,
it,
którą
that's
można
also
dropić.
good. But a lot of this comes down to the fact that these ones have a different way of distributing items. In the past, we said, okay, we've got some broken stuff for you guys, like unnerfed counts and so on in the previous ones, and we're just gonna make this fair by making them incredibly unlikely to get. If you watch videos of people opening a lot of past reliquary keys, you'll notice they don't really get the good items that often. There's a bias towards the junk, even though foily special junk has still got value, of course, because it's a collector's item. It wasn't a particularly fair distribution. With this new Val reliquary key, we're trying a completely flat weighting, so every item has equal chances of spawning. And so while there are some fewer, less valuable items in there, there's also some very valuable Val items, especially valuable in foil, and they're equally likely. And so because of this, we're being careful and making sure it doesn't drop particularly often. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with the value of these, because we would rather it be a case that even the foily worse items are still worth something from a collector point of view later, rather than just water it down.
O
I'm gonna
kurwa,
try and
będzie
bring a little bit of
misja w
detail
tej
out
lidze
here.
Headhunter.
Is Headhunter in there? Is there a foil Headhunter?
I don't believe that Headhunter is classed as a Val item. So this is all the Val items in Path of Exile. There's quite a lot of them.
I
Dupa.
see. Okay. Well, that's a pretty important detail for people that want to kind of do some math on there, because they'll be able to look at whatever's a Val item, count them, and then see one in
Just
how
po
many
tuningu
you've got of
walami.
getting specific items.
Yeah,
since
we'll
they
have
are
an
flat.
UV chart the next day, like with Magic the Gathering sets,
Nice. I look forward to reading some of that detail, seeing what things I should be hoping for. So a big change is to beast crafting, and in particular, beast item splitting. And for those of you who don't really understand or know what that was all about, effectively it was item printer go burr, but people were able to duplicate certain things ad infinitum. So usually stuff like six white socket good chest bases that can then be crafted, or other
No.
crafting stage items that can be finished off. And so groups of people were able to get together, pool resources, craft these bases, and then print them for the rest of the league. So what led to this change to effectively make it so that this can't happen anymore?
Part of it is that when we initially designed the splitting stuff for beast crafting, we knew that there was some base, because with an item there's the base and there's the mods on it, and splitting will wreck your mods generally and copy the base. So in a case where the base is the hard part to get, then the splitting recipe is valuable. And so we knew what valuable bases there were in the game beforehand. It's just that pool has increased a lot over time, and it's become incredibly abusive with stuff like watchstones and heist contracts or heist blueprints and so on, and the really good crafted bases for crafting projects. And so this was something we were keeping an eye on. And of course, there are ways of balancing it. We could just make those beasts incredibly rare and so on, and eventually it becomes a different way of doing a mirror. But we didn't really like that approach. So we started fighting on a specific basis of watchstones and heist blueprints, for example, were quite abusive. So we started toning things down there. But the cases keep cropping up, and so we feel that this change here, where you can still duplicate something one time per item, is probably a sensible way to do it. It means that we're not having to fight it on a beast rarity basis. And it still means it's a viable mechanic where if you are crafting an item, you can potentially make 2 of it using this method.
It kind of follows the rule of mirroring a little bit, although it does make the original effectively mirrored as well, so that it can't be split again. It can still be changed, though, obviously.
Yeah, it does prevent the cartels from continuing to print many copies of the item, which is a cool mechanic, and I really like that. But the same thing does exist in the game in other ways, like those new vendor recipes that we've added, right? Some of those have some economic impact, right? What if someone finds one of those and doesn't tell people how it's done? They just start making the item you get from it.
O kurwa,
You
faktycznie,
realize
ty!
if certain things spike in value in the trade economy, unexplainably.
Jak
Hint, hint.
nowe crafty,
I'm
nowe
sure the,
vendor
trade
recipe.
cartels
Ktoś
will,
rozkmini
like,
jakąś
find a way to
rozkmini jakieś
make
vendor
money.
recipe
Yeah.
i się
I
z
should
nikim
note
z
that
tym
it's
nie
still
podzieli i
worth,
będzie
like, if you get a
napierdalał
great watchstone,
itemy z tego
with
vendor
really good
recipe.
sextants on it, it's probably still worth
Mi się to nie uda,
because
nie?
that
Bo
way
ja
you
gram
can
na
potentially
streamie, więc
duplicate
jakbym
sextants.
odgarnął jakiegoś
So
zajebistego
there's
crafta,
one
to
way
by
you
zostało to
You
między
just
nami
can't do it
tylko,
with the
nie?
rest of the league.
Ale jak ktoś to zrobi na cichaczu, to kurwa.
So on talismans,
No
and
to musiało
kind
być
of
warte
like
coś.
looping into this is the idea of like the value of dropped rare items as well. So
Mirror
it's changed now
recipe.
so that they drop anointed, but they don't use the affix rolling 2.0 system, which caused them to drop a lot better. Now, thanks to the new affix rolling system, alongside the like implicits that talismans have implicitly, and the random anointments, which could be really good ones, really valuable ones.
Siema
The
Hejzyn, jeszcze
effect was
słucham.
that talismans became one of the few rare items that I was like really interested in looking at on the ground and
Zawsze
picking up
się
and looting, and
znajdzie jakaś
potentially being an
konfitura.
upgrade as opposed to crafting or trading for my
Jeszcze słucham, bo
upgrades.
to jest dużo info
There
też
seems to be a
od
bit of a
prostu od
goal
Chrisa.
that Pee-wee is striving for to have rares become more relevant again. So I'm curious why the like pullback away from the loot 2.0 system for talismans then.
So there's a couple. The first thing to note is that the well-rolled mods thing isn't meant to be a loot 2.0 thing, right? The well-rolled mods thing is not for it's not the item decluttering system, which is a separate thing that we've got going on. It was implemented for heist because when you finished an entire heist and you get offered one or several rare items to pick from, we want to make sure that they're not just complete trash, because it is true that you can look through quite a lot of rares before you find something.
Dokładnie.
So it's a lever that's available for us changing how drops spawn. With talismans, the original intent of a talisman is that it has a powerful implicit mod and it has random with normal weightings, explicit mods that cannot be changed. It's corrupted, right? So the normal experience with a talisman is you find one that's got a good implicit and you're using it because of the good implicit. The explicit mods are going to be worse than what you have on a regular amulet because that's just how talismans work. And of course, the god talismans are the ones where you get a good implicit and also luckily get good explicit mods.
Siema Moryka.
So that's the original design intent for the item. Now,
Łysa
we
dusego?
found that, like, obviously people weren't using these and they didn't like them, and our options were to just dramatically increase the implicits on them. But we realized, oh, well, we've got this concept of anointments, why don't we throw those on?
Siemano, witam.
And so
Ej, bo jak
we
kciuka
added
słucham,
anointments,
czy słucham
hoping that it
kciuka
would make
jeszcze?
talismans usable. And I guess somewhat defensively, the decision was made to also juice the mods a bit, because
Pozdro
that's new tech
swego,
that we had
zajebiście,
available,
witam
which certainly
wszystkich. Siema
helps.
Pidżam.
But that's basically data that we have now. We know we don't need to actually
Wy
do
od
that.
Chrisa
And we
wszyscy
have to be careful
przyszliście?
with how we generate rare items in the
Ja
future,
mam
because
jakąś
this is all
transmisję
working
kurwa w
towards
plecy.
the grand decluttering project, which
Co jest?
involves us essentially generating multiple rares and picking the best as far as the mods go. And there's no need for us to double dip here with talismans. As you say, talismans were an incredibly exciting thing to find because you were very
Pozdrawia.
likely to get
On
an
teraz
upgrade.
gada o
Far more
memach,
likely than any other
talizmanach,
type of
kurwa.
item in the game,
Najpierw
because they were
zboostowali je
just
tak, że dali
skewed
randomowy
towards good
anoint, a
ones.
teraz je...
And that's bad from an
Teraz będzie
expectations
można
point of view, and
zmieniać.
also it's
Teraz
just
będzie można
different to all the other
zmieniać
items in the game.
ten
So we're fixing that
enchant,
while
ale będą
understanding that
chujowe
we do
rolki
actually
teraz
need to
gorsze.
finish the decluttering
Za
project,
mem
which is
jeden
going
wielki.
to, for those who aren't aware,
Pozdro,
basically
dzięki za followy,
you get a
siema.
lot of drops in
Ja
Path of
wyłączyłem
Exile,
dźwięki
and
za
we're essentially
followy,
finding a way
bo
of turning
Kciuk
item
mówi.
quantity into
Ja nie chcę być
rolling multiple
niekulturalny.
items and dropping the best ones instead. So in a situation where you clear a map and have 400 rares on the ground or whatever, that's going to be a much
zostawić.
lower number of rares, but it's equivalent to seeing
Siema,
more than
siema,
400.
witam.
So instead of having to ID 7 swords and see if any are good, you'll be IDing 1 or 2 swords which are equivalent or better than the 7 that you previously would have seen. And so this is something we're working towards, because there's a lot of items in Path of Exile, and this, of course, affects the whole clicking thing. where
Siemanko,
it's saying
witam.
you have to pick up a lot of stuff. Obviously, if there is a more reasonable number of items falling, then there's far
Ej,
less
ale
clicking
wiecie jest jaki
involved
plus
there.
talizmanów?
It probably has an effect on performance.
Great
with
Wolf
rendering
talizman
the
zawsze będzie miał tą
ground and so
samą
on.
rolkę.
A small effect, but every item
Chyba,
is
że
technically a
znerfią
draw
quantity
for the
na
item and
talizmanach,
shadow,
ale jeżeli
so
Great Wolf talizman dalej będzie
reducing
mógł wylosować
vast
10%,
sea of white items on the
Great
ground
Wolf
certainly
I
helps.
talizman,
And
to
so
jeszcze
that's a
będę mógł
project
na
we're
niego
working on,
anointa
but
wrzucić i nie będę miał
also
randomowego
a
anointu
dangerous
na
one,
Magic Findzie z
because
tym talizmanem.
right now you're used to seeing a lot of items and you ID them and they're generally bad, which is okay because you're not meant to get an upgrade every area. But if we say, okay,
Witam,
items are
witam.
better now and we reduce it a lot, so you get far fewer items and you ID those, and those are also still all bad, which is okay because you're not meant to get an upgrade every area. People say,
Dokładnie.
what is the point? You've just given me far less items and they're still bad. Because it's hard to tell the difference between two random distributions that aren't spitting out 10s at you, if you see what I mean. And so we want to make sure we do this in a way where the game still feels very compelling to find item upgrades without making it too easy as a
Cześć,
result.
cześć,
in
siemanko.
order
Dzięki
for
za
right
followy
players to
wszystkim.
like the
Witam,
system.
witam.
Anyway,
Dzięki za rajda,
We'll get
witam
it
w ogóle.
sorted out, but that's basically a project
Ja
for
próbuję,
later
ja mam
this year.
podwojoną ten.
It is an
Słucham i
interesting
gadam.
psychological challenge because,
Dzięki
like
za
on the
follow, witam,
surface,
witam.
it seems like a great
Kenny.
idea to reduce the items, and
Kenny,
I'm
Draku,
really
Smok,
looking forward to that.
Benson,
And I
Bender,
hope
Shi,
that it does work out really well. but,
Shinotsu,
it's an interesting,
KMO.
like concern that it might not end up feeling right.
It's one of those things where if we did release it with Path of Exile 2, is this is how items work now. Look, there aren't that many of them, but look, there's a fun game where the progression is good and you're finding...
Ty, Pidżam, widziałeś w ogóle?
And everything is balanced around
Jakiś
it.
bicast będzie po
Things
tym.
would be 100% fine.
Kurwa, miał być
You
Shapecast, a jest
can
jakiś
pitch it
bicast.
wherever you
Ty,
want on the
oszukali
rare
nas.
power curve and the game still
Wzięli nam
works.
nazwę, wzięli nam
But we have a
pomysł i
game right now where
oni
players
będą
have
mieli tu na
expectations to
głównej
get
scenie, a
upgrades
my
at a
co?
certain pace. And if we
Reporter.
just said, look, the new reality is upgrades are far slower or something, that wouldn't be acceptable. So we have to make sure that the power ascension of items is similar to how it currently is. It's
Shapecast,
just done through players not having to read as
ludzi.
many items per area.
PoE2 does seem like a good time to do that change, but
Ej,
is
ale
there any
jaja.
chance like this loot squish thing
Cześć
is
Bastik,
happening
siemanko, witam.
potentially earlier in PoE2?
Podrabiańcy
I
jakieś
think
tam.
it needs to happen earlier. And I
Bicast,
say
no,
that because A, we want
Mamy
to actually make sure
Shapecast, a nie
it's
jakiś
good by the
Bicast
time
dają, ty.
PoE2 is released, and this is something we can, like, I don't want to jeopardize the launch of PoE2. I would much rather get feedback from players and try to solve problems. Like, I sympathize with the fact that people say they have to click a lot, right?
Dzięki
I'm
za
sure
follow.
action RPGs are about picking
Pidżam
up
teraz
items
film
and
skleja?
clicking.
Kurwa,
but
ty jeszcze się nie
there's a lot of
skończył,
items in Path of
jeszcze się nie
Exile, more than
skończyło
there should be.
ten,
And so that's
zapowiedź
something
nowej
we
ligi, a
probably
ten
need
już
to
film
address.
robi o nowej lidze. No
And
przegość.
players have raised the whole, maybe it
Szybko
affects
działa,
performance, and undoubtedly everything
Skubaniec.
affects performance. That's not the primary reason for fixing it, but it
On to
certainly
pewnie
helps
na
to,
żywo nagrywa
you know,
tam pewnie
reduce the
już
sea of
ten.
items on the ground and just
Ja wiem, on
readability and
pewnie jest, już
approachability. You
lurkuje,
know
tego
how
nie pisze.
would want Path of Exile to feel approachable to new players, and if they look at a guy playing a map with the sea, like the floor is entirely covered with items, and that's with the loot filter on. There are many reasons why we do need to address it earlier. It just means we have to do it in a way that's careful to not cause players to feel that we've wrecked drops in the game, even though our goal is equivalent or better item power from drops.
Siema, siema, witam. Dzięki za followy dalej. O, Dropik
I'm
wpadł, no
just
właśnie.
curious why there isn't
To
like a
jest
cap
skrzydła,
on
ben-
character
skrzydła.
size in regards to Headhunter. Why do we get Shin point of view Headhunter characters
O cicho,
instead
Headhunter.
of just like, I don't know, 3 times the size characters?
No właśnie,
It's
to
still
jest.
impressive.
No właśnie.
Just curious.
I don't know why there isn't a cap on it. One second. The team says there is a cap now in 3.14. Well, there you go. Look what you've done, Ziggy. You
Wow, nie będziemy
I
rośli
killed
na
Shin point of view
Headhunterze.
single-handedly. It's all
Yeah.
my
Będzie
fault.
cap, do jakiej wielkości będziemy mogli urosnąć, mając buffy na Headhunterze. W końcu nie będzie widać tylko samych stóp biegających po mapie. Pogers.
I'm sure there's like some like small portion of players that's like, I love Shin point of view.
I will make sure that
Shin
that's
point of
listed in
view.
the patch notes under a section called Ziggy nerfs.
Yes. Perfect.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
Widzisz, że...
oh, great. I did want to ask about the like rare.
Mówili, jakiej zasadzie będzie drop H? Headhuntera będziesz mógł dropnąć wszędzie ze wszystkiego od 40 poziomu. Nie musisz odpalać Nemesis nic. Możesz dropnąć z każdego moba, z każdego bossa od 40 levelu.
It is, and that's because this is a case where we say to you, this is the reward you'll be getting, and if that's a random rare with normal odds, people will look at it and say, I see 1,000 random rares in a typical play session, I don't care about your item. Whereas we're going to show them some good items, and they're going to say, I'm going to risk everything, and then they're going to die, and then they'll be angry, and we'll laugh.
Mogliby usunąć H w pizdu? No ja też się zgadzam z tym. Nie chciałbym tego Headhuntera w tej grze.
Is there anywhere else you're looking to
Headhunter,
add that
kurwa,
system?
to
Like
jest broken
to, I
item,
don't
jak
know,
można
like
tym
certain
grać w ogóle,
league
chłopie?
specific,
To jest jakiś PPG.
reward pools,
Zbyt dobre,
like
człowieku, to
costumes,
powinni wyjebać z gry już
things
zanim
like
jeszcze tu
It's
przyszedłem.
generally cases where it's not okay to drop a pile of items. I would rather, generally, drop a reasonable number of items for players to choose between, but in the case that we have to present them with one, then we'll make sure that it's a compelling one. And things like the display cabinets in Heist, or the items in the ritual window or the ultimatum offerings, those things there, we don't get the ability to give them a whole screen full of stuff to pick from. So I like the garage sale thing of going through a bunch of things and trying to work out what's best, but we use the well-rolled
Ja
stuff
bez tego
in
rozmiaru
order
ma
to
sens?
offer people a single item. Now, of course, we'll be
No,
doing
w sensie
decluttering
buffy się
to make
dalej
sure
będą
that when I
stakować,
say you're
tylko
going
nie
to look
będziesz
through
tak
some rings to
rósł
find out what's best, I'm
niepotrzebnie.
not talking about 400 of them, but we'll hit a sweet spot.
Haha, tylko brałem dla rozmiaru
Right,
postaci.
Path of
A,
Exile,
widzisz,
the
kompleksy
currency
masz, ej.
making
Nie można mieć
strategy to look
kompleksów.
through hundreds and
Kejwero.
hundreds of rings and amulets.
Brałeś Headhuntera, żeby mieć większego.
It's changed a little bit
Postać?
over time.
Spoko.
There was
Wolno
some
tak, ej,
mention
co ty?
of Val skills. Will we be getting any new Val skills?
There are no new Val skills in this expansion, but one could argue that if you're taking a Val skill that was previously barely used and making sure it is good enough to be used, then that's essentially the meta introduction of that skill. So we're hoping to see more use of the worst skills, and a lot of this is like we look at the
Wiecie nad czym się zastanawiam? Pamiętacie Nemezis czesty z Legionu, Nemezis czesty z Blighta i tak dalej? Albo właśnie Time Lost Inkubatory? One teraz nie będą miały sensu, skoro wszystkie itemy, nawet te, które były przypisane do Legacy League, czy tam do League 10, nie będą miały sensu, bo teraz to wszędzie może dropnąć, z każdej skrzynki, z każdego moba.
He didn't
Well,
listen.
the messages.
He didn't listen.
I'm kidding.
No.
The changes will be good. They'll make more Val skills be usable, and of course, there's new ways to buff them with the.
Kurwa, znerfili
new
kiedyś
Xeri
Val
base
skilla,
type
teraz ja
changes and so on,
odnawiałem.
So it should be pretty exciting.
No Rarity MF to
Not
może
too
być Think
exciting.
w tej grze, jak teraz nie trzeba mieć
Well,
Nemezis.
Very
If
exciting.
I'm not
Kurwa,
the one
wchodzisz
doing the
chłopie do
live stream
6
next time,
aktu,
then
wychodzisz
you'll
na
have-
ten. Wychodzisz tam na
No,
placyk i człowieku dropisz z moba Headhuntera i masz
Right,
takiego
right.
zonga. O
I'm
chuj
going
się
to
to
let
stało.
Chris say dumb shit.
Oh dear.
Tak, no tak, Benson, masz prawdę.
No.
No, rację masz rację, no to jest też dobry punkt.
Abex. Okay, where am I? I'd like to ask about something near and dear to my heart.
Akwedukty!
Can we expect any new quality of life improvements, particularly in the realm
cicho,
of
czekajcie
reducing
chwilę.
the number of clicks in the game or player strain?
We're looking into
Wypowiadają
QOL
info?
changes that we can make, and we try to surreptitiously wrap them into each release that we do. So there's bits and pieces. Nothing click or strain related in this expansion, and that's partly because I want to try to tackle the decluttering as a way of really solving it. Like, I don't feel that suddenly action RPGs shouldn't involve clicking on items to pick them up. I think that that's
Dokładnie.
been fine for a couple of decades, and humans' physiology hasn't changed. But I
Dokładnie.
do completely acknowledge Path of Exile has way too many items to pick up. So
Dokładnie.
yes, we will solve this probably by that method.
Dokładnie.
I also
No.
have a pretty firm belief that it's important that in order for something to matter to players, there has to have some degree of weight in the game, right? That's why items have, the Tetris thing going on in the inventory, and where you've got to go and stash them in specific places, and
Dokładnie.
things have to have identity, and
Hmm.
clicking on them in order to pick them up is an important part of that. So I wouldn't want a
No.
thing where as you run around, the items are automatically scooped up into your auto-managed spreadsheets that you can, export to Excel and so on, which is kind of the way that goes. It's a bit of a slippery slope thing. But yeah, people having to
Lewis
click too
ogólnie
much, we
pracuje w
need to address
Brothers?
that. And
Widziałem?
whenever we're dropping
Ale
currency,
nie
for example,
wiedziałem.
we do ask what are some reasonable
Nie mówił
sizes
nic.
here, so you get a couple
No,
of
ale to
stacks,
dobrze,
a few
nie?
stacks
To
to
jest
pick
bardzo
up.
duża-
We make sure to fix it so we're not dropping
bardzo
pennies
popularna
everywhere like
firma,
in some
no.
leagues. We are very consciously aware of that, but I think a lot of it's going to come from
Nie, no.
decluttering. And
Żartowałem,
we're not afraid of
żartowałem.
making QOL changes, right? A discussion we're having soon is what QOL changes can we make? And it's good to keep pumping those out, just the right ones rather than ones that we're kind of badgered into doing.
The Parandus
Huh.
coins are like a perfect example of picking up pennies, where you'd get Parandus chests that drop like literally 10 or 15 piles of 2
No,
pennies.
bez
Sure.
kitu.
Obviously, those are being increased now as part of the Parandus change, but like their piles being condensed, since those are things that can like super easily stack.
I'll make sure that we're not having 10 or 15 piles to pick up when we're doing the
Fantastic.
changes here, because that does sound
Please.
unreasonable.
I beg you. Another one would be like, I noticed, so I'd been like tracking my clicks a little bit in PoE, and one thing I noticed was like a lot of my clicks are coming from transferring small items from my inventory to my stash. It's a lot better now that I don't have to change tabs every time I want to transfer something, so that happens automatically. But is there any like possibility of being able to do that sort of stuff in like fewer clicks to transfer over to your stash? I've already picked the item up and felt its weight at that point.
A fair argument. There's some technical considerations with moving multiple items at the same time we'd have to look into, but that's something I'll discuss with the team. No promises, though.
I promise I would patiently wait and watch the items go tuk 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 over from my inventory. Probably be really satisfying, actually. I look forward to hearing more about it. As I said, it is something close to my heart a little bit sometimes. Question about the breach stones.
Chodzi o odpalanie
So now that we can use
6
blessings
kont
to
na
upgrade our breach
wirtualnych
stones, it's going
maszynach.
to be a lot easier to get pure breach stones.
Yes.
Is the XP getting nerfed from those at all?
No.
Is that what
have fun.
it's like? Okay. Well, there you go. Lots of XP. We've got a lot more community questions now that have piled up. I've woven a few in at relevant points. Thanks for asking the questions, folks. We have Buse asking, what was the change in the life pool showing leech or something? So the life pool was doing very perceptive by my views, doing some interesting things during a certain point.
Right. Okay, so you're looking at a petrified blood skill there. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but this is the one where while you're on low life, which is now at 50% as the threshold, hits that you take will partly be applied instantly like normal and partly affect you over time. And so it shows 2 levels in your health orb, one of them being the level that's kind of trickling down to.
Mm.
Oh.
I like the sounds of that mechanic. There was also the
Wygląda jak
like more
bardzo
low
dobra
lifey
defensywna
stuff
bardzo
that's
dobry
based
defensywny
around
skill w
not
sumie.
having auras
Mamy rację
reserved. So we
jakieś.
saw one character that had an aura on, and then at another point didn't have an aura on, and stuff like that.
Yep.
So there's a bit more playing around there with the idea of low life this league to check
Oh yeah,
into.
there's a lot of stuff going on here. We've got 8 new gems in total, and it really solidifies, but it both makes low life easier to maintain, safer for people, lots of different builds, lots of skills that explicitly spend life by themselves, like a lot of the blood skills do, and also ones that count how much life you spend. And so it's a thing where you use the skill, and if you use it enough times, or other skills that consume life, then it ramps itself up a
Fajny
bit.
jest ten skill,
And
który
so
teraz
there are a
leci.
lot of
Te
different
macki
ways to
takie
build
dziwne.
blood-themed characters.
There's like a ton of interesting details in these videos, so I encourage if you're interested in some of that stuff to go back and watch the VOD. I've seen it 3 times now, so I've noticed a bit more and more each time. But particularly the skill section, if you're interested in that life stuff, because I'm pretty curious how
I
that's
tak na
gonna
HC
play
będą
out.
grały 2 skille znowu. No, na HC i tak będzie znowu.
Rodrigo asks,
Kurwa nie,
with the
ale te
buff of
4!
Bestials,
Kurwa,
will
nie
other built
przeżyłem.
implicit be
Fuck.
buffed to compensate?
Za każdym
Or
razem.
will the Stygians be stronger again?
Everyone's shaking their heads at me.
That's a no. Stygians are the way to go. As has often been the case.
Oh.
Zisu asks, will there be a change in the amount of essences, or you simply want to change the power of them?
My understanding is it's just the power that's changed here.
Nice. Okay. It was regular essences didn't change apart from the tier 5 screamings being able to reroll things like a chaos orb now, right?
Screaming acts like a chaos orb, and I'm pretty sure the changes are just to the high-end ones. Other than that, can you confirm that?
The corrupted ones, right?
Oh. Right. So they say there's numeric improvements to general essences. So this would have been a buff-focused balance sweep. And that's what we've tried to do here, is a buff-focused balance sweep to the rewards of the past leagues.
Interesting. Some of those are already like better than tier 1 of the relevant modifiers, so it'll be interesting to see. Maybe some of the ones that aren't are now to that
Esencje
power level
dostaje
or something.
buffa, jak ktoś... Ciekawe co tam
Curious
zbieg
to
zmienia,
see.
masz te esencje.
D General Lee asks, what will happen to Twice Enchanted Lab? A double reroll? Yeah, I'm curious about this. Will it present all 6 options at once, or will it be like the 3 options, you apply it to an item, and then there's another 3 options?
There's a little thing on the UI that's how many times you get to
Right.
use.
There's some UI that says how many times you get to use the bench.
Ah,
So
fantastic.
my understanding is it presents you with your 3 plus 2 options, and you can, so
That
your
makes
3
sense.
plus the other base types options, and then you can pick it twice.
Yeah, if it was all at once, it would kind of be a little confusing because you'd be like thinking that you're only getting 1 enchantment, but just more options. That'd be like a completely different mechanic. Which I guess
Our
is something you play with.
past content reworks started with, let's make the labyrinth give you 3 choices. That was where that whole thing started. Then it went into itemized temples as our 2 headline features, and then
Tak, można
so
na
much other
relitemach
stuff
używać,
changed. It
no.
was
Tam
awesome.
było, mówił to
I
w
can't believe
tym
like how many of those things were like literally my exact things that I wanted to see, like the itemized temples. And I just wanted to like point this out, but the items dropping from the boss in the temple. So now like the items that drop from the boss that with the specific modifiers are based on the runes in the temple.
Yeah.
That's how I
Nie
thought
można
it
było?
worked when the
Nie,
league
tylko
first
pierwszy
came
tier i
out, and I was
chyba
really
drugi.
disappointed when it didn't work that way.
I
So I'm
reszta
glad
tierów
to
trzeba
see
było
that
na
finally come
białych.
back around.
It'll help.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to doing a bit more temple action now. Actually, I kind of wanted
Albo
to.
pierwszy, tylko nie wiem. Ale
Um,
pierwszy i drugi chyba
Beefcake
można było
Crunch asks, are there Atlas tree nerfs, i.e. the
Esencje
hard
zamiast
meters?
chaos
Yeah,
orbów? Nie no, esencje
because of
zawsze
the
działały na
Atlas.
tej zasadzie, że
That's
były
the
chaos
thing.
orbem, tylko że targetowały jeden
So I
konkretny
haven't seen the
statystykę.
changes for this, so I'm going to talk generally speaking here. We introduced the system in the last league, and that means when it's introduced, there's going to be stuff that's wrong. So there's going to be stuff that had to be buffed a lot. There's going to be stuff that had to be nerfed a lot. And so I would expect fully to see some of the most abusive stuff probably toned down, and I would expect to see some of the stuff no one was picking to be more powerful. But I have not seen the changes, so I'm just making that up. Let me ask the team. How accurate is that?
Yeah.
They say, yep.
Something swapped around and stuff.
Yeah, so there are a bunch of changes. I mean, it's the thing we're learning about as we go. We make the system, we test it as best we can with our team of 150 people here, and then we dump it on millions of people online and see how they break it, and then they really break it, and then we can either choose to leave it broken, which is the wrong choice when you're running a game that's going to be around another few decades, or make some changes. And so this is version 2. It's still meant to be powerful and compelling, and we'll see what people think.
No, bez kitu.
Awesome stuff. A bunch of people spamming in the chat are just spamming flasks.
No,
so
to
I'm guessing
ale
they're curious
chemis...
if there's
No,
going to be
no, no,
any
na samochody,
flasking
samochody.
changes.
No flask changes in this one.
I assume that's the idea of like pressing flasks frequently, which is
Yeah,
something.
we're very aware of the feedback. We just don't have a change to make at this stage, and we don't want to make like small changes that don't really fix the problem or whatever.
Gotcha. Malinoff asks, is there a fix for group Maven witnesses and invitations, changes to syncing progression, nerfs to 6 players earning progression,
O, właśnie o tym mówią, o tym nerfie.
etc.?
Don't think so. We'll look into it.
Yeah, so there's like a few questions around the idea of
Oh,
like
boy.
multiplayer Atlas progression. Having
Yeah.
done quite a bit of that now, there's like some stuff
Oh,
that works
nice
really
enough.
well and other stuff that is a little awkward. So I think it's kind of just stuff that needs to be looked into across the board for a few.
This is
bits and
prompting
pieces.
some conversation with the designers, so we'll make sure that we look into that and have a look. No promises that that's ready by next week's release, but yeah, it'll certainly be something we investigate later.
Yeah, awesome stuff. I feel like it's at an awkward point where it's starting to become quite good for party play, where things are working. So then it's really jarring when certain stuff doesn't work.
Yeah.
So looking forward to seeing more about that then.
Kurwa, nic nie rozkminisz, no, a to jak to
Boo
źle?
asks, can you ask? I will. Is
I
that
will.
all? Will fractured items get a similar
Mówili, że w
treatment
ogóle na
like
to nie
split
patrzyli.
items? Can you 5 to
I że
1
może to
vendor
zrobią.
fractured items for clean bases?
Że nic z tym nie
I guess
zrobili
that might
nawet.
also apply to split bases too.
Oh, so one of the team members has just clarified that there's a change for the Uncharted Realms invitation. Only the map owner gets the witness rather than everyone in the party. That's in 3.14. And someone else says we're changing so the capture of bosses in Uncharted Realms isn't shared. It's only the owner. Right, okay, fair enough. So that's one change
A,
there.
zmienili!
With regard to the fracturing
teraz tylko-
bases, I don't know. of
Teraz tylko
any changes
host
there.
mapy będzie dostawał
No changes to the
invitation
fracturing stuff.
z Enchanted Realms i tak samo będzie
Chat is
dostawał
very
bestię,
excited.
tylko
Thanks for the extra detail. Background
party
devs.
No worries.
I always love to like turn to the side.
party, znaczy
and
party
talking to the
owner,
background
nie,
I
devs.
would not dare do one of these by
Autori-
myself.
I would never change that aspect of the Q&A. I love it when like one of the devs randomly like kind of pops
No
in
i
and
zajebiście, nie, że
mentions
to
some
ogarnęli.
things, or you like
Znaczy mi to nie
bring me
przeszkadza,
on over or
wyjebane tam, czy
something.
se robili, czy
I
nie,
love
ale
those moments.
to takie oszukaństwo trochę, nie?
Sekna asks, what are your thoughts on migrating hardcore leagues to SC leagues to encourage people to try out hardcore?
Tryhard hardcore, chyba.
This is one of those things that sounds really good at face value, right? Like, I'm a hardcore player, and I would absolutely love it if I can just keep playing in the equivalent standard league. But historically, the reasons why we didn't do this was that we felt it would be demoralizing for you to be playing standard, taking it seriously. And by standard, I mean the standard current challenge league, taking it real seriously, and then some hardcore player appears above you on the ladder, super angry that he's now in your trash pool of a league, blah, 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 blah. You see? And maybe that's just a psychological thing, but that's the reason why we had it so it goes to real hardcore, to real standard when a hardcore character dies. There's also the thing where hardcore is meant to be impactful. Like back in the day in traditional action RPGs, when you die in hardcore, you lose your character, just gone. You can't log in, right? Here we have it so you can keep a shrine to your character in standard league. And I get it, that's basically useless for a lot of players. They're never going to actually go and play that character in standard. But there is meant to be a consequence to death. And I kind of feel that the type of player who would start to play hardcore because standard challenge league is their fallback plan is probably not the type of player with the temperament to really enjoy hardcore for what it is. And so I don't think we're going to change that in the near future. But yeah, it sounds good at face value.
Envious and myself coincidentally ask any updates on racing community events and things like race seasons and stuff like that. If you didn't know, people, that there was Path of Exile was featured on GDQ recently for the first
that
time,
was
which was super exciting and really awesome job. And Taitai Killer set a world record at the time.
Yeah, congratulations, Taitai. That was awesome.
Pojebany, jaki
In terms of racing
jaki
updates,
Taitai
we're just
rekord
slowly
zrobił?
working towards our goal of having a integrated
13
race
minut
system,
Merveil?
and we're trying hard to
Hello,
support
pisał
community
wcześniej, ale-
events. If you're running a large scale community event, you know to get in contact with Bex and the community team to try to arrange some stuff. And so, racing is important to us. I know I said at XOCON that 2020 would be the year of racing, and then that got shut down by a number of external factors. So we're trying to support it as much as we can, but we haven't yet got spare development resources to put a lot of push into the racing stuff. Hopefully soon, we'll begin to be able to roll out some improvements though.
No, Ranger, to
I'm going
drugi
to
raz
start a
leci.
custom now where every one of these Q&As I ask, is there going to be any word on Path of Exile Royale?
One day.
24
Sorry,
minuty
get
wal
the-
z drugiego aktu? Ja kurwa jak w pół godziny się zmieszczę z pierwszym, to jest dobrze, ale żeby dwa,
You just said you
24.
would.
Ziz asks, any quality of life updates for fishing?
Oh,
We never
fishing!
patched no those.
Yeah.
Fishing stuff was certainly hinted at in the video somewhere.
There
Ew.
Among the
was.
other things.
I
Było,
saw
bo
that. You got the
sprzedano.
vendor recipe wrong. You clicked accept on the wrong vendor recipe, by the way. It didn't work. Just saying.
4 people have tried it already.
All right. Thank you very much, Chris, for the Q&A, and thank you, chat, for all the questions.
Great questions, everyone. Hope you really enjoyed
Zrobił to na
Ultimatum.
streamie jakichś typów, gdzie jest,
Awesome stuff.
jeszcze uczył grać
All
ludzi.
right. We'll see you guys all for
Siema, Rocky.
Bayclast soon with Rory. But that's it for now.
Połączenie 3 wędek